great. I'm loving it. I've shrunken. It's cold outside, guys. Have you seen the weather? It is. It doesn't. I mean, it gets kind of cold there. What is it? You're like, oh my god, it's like 45 degrees. Oh. Oh, buddy. Oh, man. Oh, yeah. The wind definitely brings an extra chill to it. That's for sure. Yes, today wasn't as cold. Like it snowed last night, but yesterday was just brutally cold. It's 17 here right now, though. It's supposed to get down to 13. I can boost you a little bit. Is there volume control in single? I don't think there is. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I'm good.
I am also good. I gotta make
Hi.
sure. There. Hi. Okay.
Hi,
I've got
my
your chat on one side. I got my chat on the other. I forgot to close my door, so my wife's gonna hear this entire thing. So I'll be right back. So that
Hi, Allie.
I'll tell her you say hi. Be right back. I'm really not prepared. Like really not
It's
prepared.
fine. So when are we ever? The second small version of me in the bottom corner. So wait. Oh, I see. Yeah, okay. I thought you were saying that on Dr. Mick's side that he had me really small and he had him really big, and I was like, wait, whoa. Like I can swap myself into the bigger one, you know? Like I can take that. Hey, Claire, how you doing? All of Texas is terrified of the cold. Well, I mean, it was what, Valentine's Day when you guys froze yourself out last year, so you're going for a double.
Like I was never even gone.
You basically were there the entire time. How you doing, bud?
Good.
Good. It's been a while since we've chatted.
It's been a little. It's arguably been too long since we've chatted.
I mean, yeah. No, I would agree with that.
Feels like it was about 90 degrees warmer last time I talked to you than it is now.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like, I don't remember when we last did our at least our official talk. Like, obviously, we have our, you know, our private DMs where we flirt hellaciously, but
Yes,
otherwise, yeah, you know, this man can make me blush like no one else. I just like, you stop it.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
For those of you who haven't caught one of these before, we're going to chat back and forth. This is, from my side, this is Dr. Mick. He is a licensed family and couple therapist and a good friend. He specializes with esports peoples and, well, families and couples, I think. But you do a lot of esports stuff, don't you?
Depends on how you quantify a lot. I do a lot relative to probably most therapists.
Okay. All right.
But the esports area of my caseload is still growing. I actually see more like traditional athletes right now than I have esports athletes, but it's a corner I'm trying to slowly build in my caseload. It's hard to do that when you have a full caseload. Like stuff kind of has to trickle in a little bit at a time. So.
Right. But
yes.
He's moved from Twitch primarily. He occasionally does a Twitch Tuesday chill, but primarily is available now on YouTube. If you aren't following him, you're missing out on one of the most eloquent and intelligent people that I happen to be able to call a friend. In fact, he's so eloquent that sometimes some of his answers, I don't even know what he's saying. I'm like, those are big words, and I do not know what they mean. By design, yeah. I'm over here, I'm just like, I hear you saying that, and I find myself having some adverse arousal towards your vocabulary here.
My job is to be as inaccessible as possible. My goal was in 2018 was to be accessible and then progressively get more and more inaccessible to people.
Just get more and more oblique. But we do not have a script in front of us. We do not. We've not talked about topics, and that always scares me a little because it's like what I don't want to reach that point. It's like where we're just kind of like when you're kids, you're just like kicking the can with your friend. Like, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? You want to go ride bikes? No. But usually we work it out and figure it out. And so I am happy to be back on the line with you, dude. And I appreciate you coming and making time for me.
I mean, you're making time for me too. I'm coming into your stream, kind of, and but I appreciate it's a mutual appreciation of time. I know you're a busy man. I'm almost impossible to get a hold of ever, and so I'm glad we finally got to do this too because it's been way too long. I love doing these, and people request these all the time. I don't know if they do on your end, but people ask me when's the next time you're joining Zine, and maybe it's just they need somebody good looking on the screen. Everybody gets tired of looking at me,
really
and they're like,
I mean,
I need more facial hair and jawline, Dr. Mick.
So, Dr. Mick, we have now met in person, and I can confirm that he is taller than me and probably about like 30 pounds lighter than me. Like, he is one skinny pole, and he fits into a very nice car that does not have a back seat, but it acts like it does. We've joked about this before. But.
It was an interesting first impression to roll up.
Because we were like, you couldn't stay there very long either, right? Like, you were on, like, we're in Vegas and he's in a driveway, like there's busy, and like I gotta hop into the car, and it's just like he didn't stop, he's just rolling, and it turns out that I have approximately the size of a tuna can to jump in this car while it's moving, and just like,
it was so funny because we were literally in Caesar's Palace, like in the valet line, and it was packed. Like, I was lucky to even see you guys sitting on the sidewalk, and then like had to yell at you through the window. Oh my god. Yeah, talk about a first impression. It was like, welcome to my world. It's tiny.
Yep. We are busy people. We don't have time to come to full and complete stops, okay?
Right. Get in while we're moving. Get in.
Get in. There was also the night where we thought we might have been locked out of the getting back in the car. There was that. That happened to us twice, wasn't it? Like, we had the concern both times. But the first time we were like, "Oh, this door's here," and then the second time that door was locked, and we had to figure out a third way.
The first time, because we were smoking cigars the first time, and then but we were lucky enough to be able to get in that gate. Remember, like we could get in the side door, and it was no problem. So then, of course, we have this false sense of confidence that we can do that every single time. And then the second time we had Allie was with us, and then we went to that door, and that door did not open, and we had to go all the way around.
Yeah, walk around the block to try and get in.
That was,
at any rate,
that would not have been fun.
But one of the things that brings us together for these is, as was mentioned, Dr. Mick is a licensed therapist, and I have been and try to be a mental health advocate as best as I can from a position of non-doctorship. But I have always been open with everybody that when I was around 13, 14, I was diagnosed with chronic depression. It's medium, borderline severe. And that's something that I live with every day, and it's something I take medication for, and it's something that doesn't go away, but you can manage it and you can handle it. And so my goal for myself is to try and help people understand that I don't feel inferior to those who don't need medication. I don't feel ashamed that I have this diagnosis or that I'm somehow weak. Like, it's to me, the analogy that I use about it is, you don't look at someone who's diabetic, you don't look down on them for needing insulin. Why would you look at someone who has, serotonin problems in their brain for taking a pill to help their serotonin levels? Like, it's the same thing. It's biology. It's not about willpower or weakness or mental fortitude or anything like that. So between my advocacy and his education, we like to both chat back and forth and kind of have conversations about whatever's on our minds, but also then coming from chat and seeing what you guys are concerned about or thinking about and answering questions. Now, that comes with a caveat, as of course, Dr. Mick cannot give you therapy online. That's not something he can do.
That's
One,
correct.
He hasn't done a proper assessment. Two, he doesn't have the proper paperwork. Three, he hasn't covered his ass so that you don't sue him. So he just kind of, and then he claims it's all like ethics or something.
And I have two states that'll come after me if I do it. So yes.
Yeah. So there's no therapy online. Try to keep your, we see questions that are like, I'm not asking for therapy, but in this hyper-specific situation that really would only apply to anyone in my exact position and has no bearing on any of the rest of the conversation, anyone here, what do you think someone should do here? And I'm going to be honest, we're smart enough. We kind of see through that, We kind of see through that.
It's become very easy to figure out at this point.
It was never difficult, but it's even easier.
Yeah, things happen enough times. You learn how to pick it out. Yes.
But there is a lot about mental health that is misunderstood. There's a lot that is stigmatized, and it doesn't need to be, and it shouldn't be. So, and I actually, interestingly, one of the things that can happen in this, and it depends on the question and everything like that, is there's things that I can answer that he can't. I'm not ethically bound by anything. I can give you my opinion. Just remember, my opinion is purely based on my life's education, what I know and believe and have learned myself, but I am not licensed. I am not a therapist. I'm not a doctor. Do not come to me for therapeutic or doctoral advice. I am simply telling you about what it is like to live in that I have learned about this situation and my experiences living with it. So, all that said, how are you?
Great. I will.
Right.
I'm going to add a little something.
Okay. All right.
Well,
feel free to
for the folks, because I'm sure
I've bloviated greatly.
No, it was great. I love listening to you talk. That's why I'm here. I want to make sure people know as well that, like, one, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm sure there's probably a lot of new folks that are watching this. So I'm not a psychiatrist. Psychiatrists are who diagnose medication because they're medical doctors. I'm not a psychiatrist, so I can't comment on really medication at all beyond saying like what it is or whatnot, but I can never ever suggest or like that you should or shouldn't take any kind of medication. That is between you and your doctor. And I similar to Zine, my goal is to make this information really accessible to people, and as he mentioned, I am more bound in doing that than Zine is. The farther up the pipeline you go with having the information, the more restricted you are to giving it out in certain ways. And so I know we've talked about this before on previous streams, but I actually, in some ways, am envious of the position that you have at times, because there are things that you are able to say or advocate for or describe that if I do that, it can get misconstrued in a way that is messy, not just for me, but for other people. People have a tendency to take what I say, this isn't a slight on you, people have a tendency to take what I say very seriously and potentially more seriously than others because they know that I have credentials, which is why I have to be very careful with how I answer stuff. And so I do have both chats open on my screen, so if people tag me in your chat, I'll see it. If people tag me in my chat, I'll see it. I know you and I usually, you usually will pick stuff out of chat, but I will see things that people ask as well while we do this. And I love that you use the platform that you have responsibly. It's one of the reasons that I'm willing to continue doing this beyond just considering you a friend. And I think you're a person that if people are not mental health professionals, you're a person that I would say I feel comfortable with them looking at and saying, that's how I would like to do it. That's a good model for how I could do this. And I hope to do the same thing for fellow mental health professionals to make sure that I'm doing this in a way that is ethical and responsible and that people can look up to. So I just like to establish that baseline before we talk, just so
Sure.
people know where we're at, because it's more important than ever right now to be clear about those things as mental health continues to sort of creep in a bigger way into streaming and stuff like that. So
For sure. And first off, I mean, I'm very flattered. That's high praise from you, and that is something that I take seriously. And I think that I've seen, I mean, obviously there's many people in the space and even in the streaming space talking about mental health advocacy and such. But I've seen good examples, and I've definitely seen bad examples. And the how to live your life and and it's just like that. Those aren't the people you should be listening to, is really what it comes down to. For me, mental health advocacy, again, is very important. My goal that I say and that I lay out for myself is I want to be the person that I wish when I was in high school that I would have known, that I could go to and be like, what's going on here? Or I could hear that this is okay to feel this, or this is okay to do that. I try to be that. I don't know who's out there. I don't know if someone, there could be someone who needs that and is listening and they don't ever type a thing in chat. But, if I can make them feel a little bit better about where they're at in their position, or encourage them in some way to help improve their position, then I think that's both. It's almost a duty to the platform, or kind of that I have here. The fact that you guys have invested so much in me, that's my way of trying to give back, and it also feeds my soul a little bit too. It's how I feel good about me, and I can go home to my parents and say, Mom, Dad, you have someone who I personally feel like you should be proud of. I like the person that I am and what I try and be. But and also at some point they're going to start realizing that our entire plan is to just talk about how the show is going to go without ever getting to
absolutely.
it.
You're going to be so jazzed up by the time we end this thing.
By the time we end this thing, we're like, let's go. We're like, that's it.
This is great. This is great. We're going to slowly turn a shade of blue.
Yeah.
So it'll be, yeah.
When I was 14, 13 or 14, I guess I'll kind of start a little bit earlier. When I was 11, my brother committed suicide, and it happened in the home while I was there. My mom and my sister. My sister, his girlfriend was actually on the phone, and she had just broken up with him. And he was a hunter. He was in his later teens, but he hunted a lot with my dad, and he had a firearm that was just that was close at hand, and it's one of those situations where you think, a couple more seconds and it probably wouldn't have happened if it had been inaccessible, because it was a lizard brain response, I think is how you kind of mention it, but just a purely emotional, unthinking reaction. And obviously that was really hard on the girl that was on the phone. My sister was fortunately, in a way, unfortunately for her, but my sister got to him first and then kept my mother from going and finding him. So she was the only one who had to see kind of the results of it. When it was that really kind of shaped a lot of my childhood and my family dynamic, of course. I mean, that's a huge thing. Funny is a little bit of a weird word, but it's somehow or another, my little early teen self, or actually preteen self, managed to sleep through both the gunshot, the yelling from my sister and my mom, and the police coming. And my mom the police were shuffling my mom and my sister out of the house when my mom remembered that I was upstairs still in bed. Wow. And I very distinctly remember her coming in and waking me up and telling me there's been a tragic accident and that my brother had died. And I can remember with stark clarity, given the time passed, of the next 24 hours and how all that kind of played out. But kind of, I don't know whether, I don't think depression is really something that can be triggered per se. Like, I think that it's, but it really heightened my awareness of kind of those emotional cycles that I would go through. And I learned from that to be very introspective and kind of pay attention to where my emotions were coming from. And I found that there were times when I intellectually would know that an emotion wasn't valid. It was perhaps, I should feel sad about this, but I should not feel this sad, this extremely sad about it. Or I should have, yes, I should have felt bad about it, but I should be better by now. And there were times when I could very clearly identify that I wasn't coming back from it. I would have these swings, and it was so out of proportion with what the events of life were. I'm not talking about, again, the death of my brother, but I bring all that up just kind of as a basis to where it really made me sensitive to emotions and the emotions that I feel, because that was part of dealing with that. That was part of learning. That was dealing with my mother's emotions, and because she had already had depression, and that obviously was a very dramatic turn for her, and something that she in some ways still has never really fully recovered from. And I don't know that you can. I mean, life goes on, and we're okay, but it really brought depression to the forefront of my mind in some ways, over the course of the next year or two. And then the thing happened that happens with many kids, and I entered the middle school years, and suddenly my parents were the worst people possible. They did nothing but nag me. They wanted me to do my homework. I didn't want to do my homework. They wanted me to to clean the house. I didn't want to clean the house. All these things, and my mom and I fought like cats and dogs through the majority, for 3 or 4 years. And then almost like a light switch, it turned off when I finally pulled my head out of my ass and was like, oh, this is how life works. Okay, maybe I should stop fighting it and just go with it. But after a particularly bad fight with my mother in the morning about going to school, I don't remember exactly, I was at school, and I had kind of established a friendship with the school counselor. I don't know whether that was by design and he was keeping an eye on me.
It feels like friendship developmentally at that point in a way that is probably good, but isn't on his end.
Yeah. I think that he had some ideas that I was in a way troubled teen, mm-hmm. and kind of took me under his wing and just was friendly with me. But that day I was in math class, and he came in, and he went over to the teacher and showed her a note, and she just nodded, and he walked out and he waved to me and he said hi, and just kind of kept walking out. And then at lunch he called me to his office and said, well, I'm going to be honest with you. Your mother had contacted me and said that, you had a really bad fight and she was concerned for you. So I want to know, are you okay? And, me being my teenage self, I kind of grumbly, I'm fine, kick it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, well, I just want to make sure you're not going to do anything to harm yourself or others or anything. And I was like, the teenage grumpy shrug. And he's like, are you saying you can't tell me that you're not going to harm yourself? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I'm mad, like the world sucks. Everything sucks. Nothing's good. And, I've, in effect, I told a school counselor and a authority figure that I can't guarantee that I'm not going to self-harm. And quite quickly from that point, I found myself in a inpatient institution where they have doors that lock and you can't get out. And they wake you up at 6:30 a.m. every morning and you follow a very regimented process. And so I was actually in a I don't know what the right term, mental patient ward or whatever. I mean, however it is you want to call it. But
usually we call them, at this point, there's usually like inpatient psychiatric facility, something like that, or like part of the hospital. Yeah.
But, it was, the people around me were mostly people that had been arrested and ordered there by court, generally drug problems and that sort of thing, or just fighting, coming out of juvie and that sort of thing. Like, I was the only one there that was there voluntarily, but, and that actually was really nice because that awarded me to start at a level where I could keep my regular clothes and didn't have to go into just the robe, because the robe was the base level, like, we don't trust you with anything. I do remember that the kid in the room next to me tried to break out with his chair on the window, and the window is obviously
they're ready for that. Yeah,
it was a break-proof glass basically. And the next time I went by, he had a mattress on the floor and literally everything else was taken out of the room, and just a counselor in there just one-on-one sitting on the floor with him talking. And so I wasn't there very long. They kind of quickly assessed me and were like, well, he's an insolent little shit, but really he's okay. We just need to get him a little, some antidepressants. And, but they kind of decided that, there was this whole depression thing. So my life kind of started in terms of emotional developmentally. That's where I kind of see myself as coming from and matriculating. And I realize this is a whole long thing that's not dialogue, and I apologize.
No, I appreciate you sharing it. And I'll bet you there's a shitload of people watching this that appreciate you sharing it. I got 2 spin-off points from what you said, if you don't mind me riffing off of it.
There's one other thing that I want to come back to, but I find this just to be extremely interesting, but this isn't specifically with mental health. But one thing that is, it really just stands out to me. Before I was sent into there, and at school and just growing up, I was a very, very late developmental, so I was very small. I was the smallest kid in the class for a long time. I was very ahead of my cohort or peers intellectually. I've always been fairly smart, and I was smart quick and early, and that's not necessarily a great thing for a kid. But I was very small, physically smart, and I was just very nerdy and not in. At this point, I'm very reclusive. I'm very withdrawn. I'm very, I have 2 or 3 friends in middle school, and was not popular, was not able to talk to people, had never had a girlfriend, anything like that. I was just this, I'm just trying to survive my way through. In the time that I was in that facility, it was about, I think I was there for like a week and a half. It was not long, but it was long enough that I got to know the people around me. From the point that I was put into there, it was a completely foreign environment. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anything. I didn't have any structure. I had significant structure that they'd placed, but I didn't have any of my usual structure. And my personality was dramatically different in that. I was immediately the class clown. I had many people laughing. They loved having me. There were points where the counselor was like, okay, stop making us laugh so we can do our jobs and stuff. But I just immediately was like unleashed and was this completely and utterly different person. When I left there, there were 3 girls there, and 2 of the 3, 66%, got me their numbers to contact them when they got out, which, nothing ever came of that. But I had gone from this completely shy, completely diminished person in my normal life to being outgoing and energetic and funny and having this completely different personality. And as soon as I got back into my normal environment, I went right back into kind of my caged self until many years later. But looking at what I do now, it's really interesting to look back at that and see that was the first glimpse of kind of the personality that I have now. But it would take literally decades to get away from the conditioning and realities of life and upbringing and stuff. And I'm not blaming my parents or anything like that, but just the situation of life that allowed me to kind of get back out from underneath that seclusion and start being outgoing and connecting and all of that again. So I found it to be very interesting from a look back perspective, that just how dramatically I had this sudden personality shift into this person that no one at the point, everyone's like, who the hell is this dude? Like, that is not you. And it turns out that was me peeking through. You just had to take off all the layers of school and childhood and
all the veneer.
And then suddenly it was here. But it took quite a few licks to get to the middle of the Tootsie Pop per se, but I'm okay with where I'm at. So sorry, what are the 2 points you wanted to riff off of?
Well, I'll do the last one. I think Mr. All said it's 3, so just
okay.
It's 3 licks to get to the center of the Tootsie Pop. But
I see.
In all seriousness, I'll reiterate again. I really appreciate you sharing that story. I had not heard the entire story before. You had told me before about your brother killing himself, but I didn't know the details of it. So I appreciate you sharing that. I know that can be hard sometimes for people to hear, but it's also, I think, important when people are willing to share those stories, because there's a lot of people that deal with stuff like that don't know where to talk about it or how to talk about it, or don't even know that they can talk about it. And that's just, it's not that you have to talk about it, but like your willingness to do that, I think, is probably meaningful for a lot of people. So I appreciate that. I should add, based on the context of that conversation, just so folks know, I also worked on the National Suicide Prevention Hotline for 3 years, so I have pretty extensive experience working with and intervening in situations that might have been similar to, like, had your brother called the hotline instead of having access to the weapon. So the two pieces that I wanted to riff off, the first one, let me back up for a second. The format of these generally is nice because I love that you'll share a lot of stuff personally, and then I want to make sure folks know I'm not doing therapy with Zine. Zine and I talk about this stuff as friends. This is not me diagnosing him, telling him what to do, anything like that. This is my opportunity to sort of like take the academic spin a little bit on some of what he shares, and hopefully those two things combined create a really like rich experience for everybody who's watching this. So the first one is your experience with going to the inpatient. I think a lot of people have a misconception about how that process happens. And it can sometimes, there are times where people will be afraid to talk to therapists or counselors or whomever. And I realize you were sort of brought into that space instead of accessing it on your own. But like, people will be in a position to talk to somebody like a professional, or even to call a hotline, and they're afraid that they'll immediately be taken off and involuntarily committed to a psychiatric wing of a hospital or something like that. And I think it's important for folks to understand that generally that doesn't happen. The circumstance that you described is one of those circumstances, however, because one of the things that we do as mental health professionals is we do an assessment in those moments. And if a person is either unwilling to cooperate with the assessment and answer the questions truthfully, and is indicating that they are skewing towards the direction of, I don't know, thus it's possible that I could be of danger to myself or to other people, we have to take that into account on the assessment. Or if they just flat out refuse, those are circumstances where we are in a position where we actually have to make sure that we keep you safe ethically and legally. And so in the case of a teenager, it can be a little bit dicey because there's parental involvement and things like that. But it very well could turn out that way if you're not able to go through that whole process. Sometimes folks will answer the questions, and the answers to those questions will indicate, yeah, maybe we should do something, but it's less of an involuntary process and more of a collaborative one. And there are times where people will go through the assessment and answer the questions, and a therapist or the counselor might determine, okay, he's probably okay. This is mostly just him being, it's him being a teenager right now, or it's this person's going through a depressive episode or whatnot, and your answers to my questions, I feel okay about the fact that I can let you go. So I want to make that point for folks, because you're better off if you're in a position with a mental health professional answering the questions and going through with the assessment, even if it's difficult to do, because that gives us more information to make a more informed choice about what we need to do in order to intervene. And more often than not, being involuntarily committed is a last resort, as opposed to it being our initial gut reaction of what to do. And so I appreciate you sharing your story about being there, because I think a lot of folks wonder what that's like. And also, I always like to make sure that folks know that, like, that's not the automatic option that happens if you ever express that you're thinking about suicide, or if you're not sure whether you might hurt yourself, or if you're in a position where a therapist is simply doing an assessment around that. So that's the first one. The second part that, this is why I made the little disclaimer here before I started this, is that moment, I actually didn't know you were asleep when that happened. When you initially talked about it, I was thinking, like, oh my goodness, like what that must have been like to be conscientious of what was happening. And this is a curiosity question for you before I sort of make my point, which is like, if you think back on that, are you glad that you were asleep, or do you wish you had been awake? Do you ever like oscillate between those two things? I'm genuinely curious.
I don't know that I've ever been like, I wish, like, I don't have the macaw's curiosity. I know that, it was very destructive for, it was a shotgun shot and to the head. So there was a closed, like, it was, I don't want to speculate too much on how the scene looked.
Sure.
But I know that my sister had been working towards becoming a nurse. And she actually had to step away from that for like 20 years, and she ended up going and finally getting her nursing degree. But it was decades later before she could go back to that. And I hadn't ever really. It took me a while to kind of realize the association of like, wait, you were doing this whole thing, and then you just stopped. What happened? And it was like it had to deal with that situation. That was it. And but no, I don't have any like woulda, coulda, shoulda, or anything really with regards to that night. I mean, I remember the song that was playing when I fell asleep, and I remember everything that was happening. But there wasn't. I don't think I was self-realized enough to really have like like at that point, 11 years old, like you're starting to you want to play Nintendo instead of doing your chores, but you don't really have like a whole like I am this person and this is who I am sort of identity built for yourself. So. I don't think I really have anything that way, but I also want to kind of add to what you're saying about the commitment to the institution and stuff. I don't remember that. I actually don't remember that clearly. Like it kind of seemed like one thing. I remember that conversation with the counselor, and then next thing I knew I was there is kind of how I remember it. But I do know that I was there pretty much voluntarily. I know that if I had taken steps to try and fight or argue or at least just say no, I'm fine, like leave me alone or anything, that I think that they're I wouldn't have ended up there. And they did, one of the reasons they released me so quickly is because they basically did that like kind of more intensive assessment, said he's a teenager, he's he's working on it, he's got some things, we some medication will help, but otherwise we're good. So I wasn't that I was like involuntarily committed, and obviously as we were talking about, what some of these kids were, but that was through they were in trouble with the law. They basically been court ordered to go to that instead of going to juvenile detention basically. Yeah. So that's a whole other thing. Yeah. In terms of like, it honestly, it never even occurred to me that might be taken by someone as, oh, I can't say this or else I'll be thrown in there, because that wasn't the experience. It's where I ended up because my parents were concerned for me and people were concerned for me, and I was being reclusive and just whatever with my answers instead of it being an open dialogue and that sort of thing. So I kind of ended myself up there, and I don't look at in no way do I look at that like, wow, I can't believe you did that, mom and dad. Like no, they were basically scared and doing whatever they thought might be best for me. Yeah. Yep. And so you know. And again, at that point, like, you know, one of the things that I didn't have empathy for at that point, but, you know, they'd been through a pretty traumatic self-harm situation with one of their children already. They're not going to mess around, you know?
Exactly.
So yeah, it certainly wasn't that I was involuntarily committed, and I don't ever want to give that impression. So
yeah, no,
kind of alerting me to that, because it's like, that's a good point.
I don't know that
be clear.
I wouldn't say you gave that impression. I just know that whenever people hear people talk about like, oh, I was committed in some way, you see the alarm bells go up in people's eyes when they hear it, of like, oh no, what did that mean, and will that be me? And so I appreciate that clarification too, but it's just I think so important, because people freak out whenever they hear that. Right. So to tie it back a little bit, like what you were just saying, one of the things when you said you're not sure whether like something can kick off depression or whether it's always there or whatnot. And this is certainly, like, I think you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I would assume that we could consider that moment to have been a like family-wide trauma.
Yes.
And for folks who don't know the definition of trauma, it's basically a gross violation of expectations that's coupled with a lost sense of safety or security. And it can be such a violation of what you think could happen in your own life that like your brain literally gets thrown into a loop and does everything it can to protect you. And it's hard for us to know sometimes what certain mechanisms people's brains are going to go into in order to protect them and get them through a very acute crisis moment like that. And I recognize there may not have been a lot of danger per se in that moment, but like obviously it scrambled everybody in a way, because that's not something I'm sure anybody was expecting to happen that night. And so what that does for folks, especially when an entire family is involved in something like that, and I'm not just talking about your family, I'm talking in general, is people get sort of frayed out into different directions relative to their development and relative to how that violation of expectation is attempted to be synthesized into their brain. And for some people, they might have where they just completely shut down. They go catatonic. They dissociate. Their brain just basically takes them out of the moment, and it's basically like they're on an autopilot. There are some people that become hyper focused and acutely aware of what's going on so that they can control the entire environment, because that's the only way that they can get through it. There's all sorts of ways that people experience that. And I want to also make sure that I'm clear that like anytime people experience trauma, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will develop PTSD. I think it's very common for people to think, oh, you know, Zine, your whole family went through this, they must all have PTSD. And that may or may not be true, but like that just because trauma happens for folks doesn't mean that PTSD itself is going to happen, because that's a disordered response to trauma. That's not a what we would consider to be like a normative response to trauma, which, by the way, a normative response to trauma is that it affects you immensely. Like it is not something that just rolls off your back. Otherwise, it wouldn't necessarily be considered a trauma, because there could be a person who ostensibly could experience what you and your family experienced and not register that as a trauma, whereas folks in your family probably did to varying degrees. One of the things that we see sometimes latent as a reaction to trauma is there can be system-wide and individual depression that happens as a result of that, because a long time ago I heard a quote about depression, that depression is actually, people who are depressed have a more realistic view of reality and are a little bit closer to reality than those who are not, because they see all of the possibilities instead of just the ones that they want to see. And having something like that happen is a real kiss from reality, right? Like that, like, holy shit, this kind of thing
possibilities now have entered into my world that we're not like, which is that somebody 100%. Could leave it tomorrow, sort of thing.
100%, right? Like somebody I love, like, could just be gone, and it could be in a really tragic way that maybe, I would guess at 11 you probably hadn't had too much representation of. So like it's one of those things where like you all of a sudden are brought closer to this idea of like, wow, especially at 11 years old, like, holy shit, where did this come from? Nobody told me that this was something that could happen. And people, there's no handbook that you're born with that immediately makes anybody able to deal with that. Like, no matter where you are in your development, when something like that happens, you're left to your own devices to process that, unless you literally have a therapist who's super focused on that kind of thing that jumps into your life immediately afterwards and is there to process it in that moment in a particular way, most people are going to have adverse effects from something like that. And that is common. It's not something to be ashamed of, and it's something that I think is important for folks to talk about how it's impacted them so that people can feel a little bit less alone in that. But that is the effect that trauma can have in families. It wiggles its way into certain relationships and sub-relationships. It affects people's general individual psyche. It can put veils on and veneer that you don't even realize it's getting put on, or it's like, because it just all happens at once. Sometimes it's a slow burn. Like, and I'm certainly not attributing by any means, I hope it doesn't sound this way, I'm not attributing like depression solely to that event, but like sometimes there are latent processes that can happen for folks in the wake of a traumatic instance or like chronic adversity. It doesn't even have to be trauma. It can be like the rigors of high school or college or whatever, where we see onset of stuff like that, and people sometimes freak out and go, well, this isn't part of the plan. This isn't how I've conceptualized myself for all this time. And it's like, yeah, nobody plans to have heart disease either, right? Nobody sits there and says like, okay, well, when I'm diabetic someday, I'll deal with it. It's if it happens, then you have to respond to it. And these types of things like depression and anxiety work the same way. So for anybody out there who's had some sort of adverse event or events in your own life or in your families or stuff like that, like, you should never expect that everything's just going to roll super smoothly afterwards. In fact, when people expect that, it makes things worse. And people start covering things up. They ignore things. They don't process them. They try to go back to a pre-trauma expectation, and you can't do that. Trauma forces you away from that in a way that there's really no going back from.
Right. And, like I think you touched on a couple different points that stood out. One is that it's very interesting. I had a friend. I'd actually met him a couple years later, but found out that he was about the same age and lost a family member through very similar circumstances, and had a kind of a similar family dynamic. And it was really interesting. With my family, one of the things that kind of my parents' takeaways was they never wanted us as the kids, my sister and I, the remaining kids, to ever doubt or question that they loved us. And so it became a very we became a very I love you family, and close, and show affection and express that caring, and really kind of just pulled us together to kind of hold and get through this. And I wouldn't say any of us ended up specifically with PTSD, but we certainly had post-traumatic stress,
Sure.
Yes. As you're saying, it's the disorder part that people get, it's kind of like, there's a whole difference between the disorder and just having that impulse. You can want things lined up, but you don't have OCD. You can, that's a whole another step that is a clinical step that you shouldn't just attribute to yourself. But for him and his family became very bitter and apart, and it kind of tore them away from each other, and they lost trust and faith and everything. And it was really very tragic to see how adversely it had affected his family and his family's dynamic, compared to how with mine we had banded together to hold each other, to help heal each other as much as we could through the times. So it is interesting, just we have those stress responses, and it can go in any number of directions, and it is messy. And they're there's still weird things to this day with my mom. Like I can literally, and I don't understand this at all, but I can literally go up to my mom and I can say, "Mom, are you gonna start crying right now?" And she will, 100%. And she'll start feeling sad, and she's like, "Well,
I wasn't going to, but I am now."
Yeah. And she's like, "I can't help it. I don't know," and and it's just like she is very, very she's very emotionally at capacity most any given time, very loving woman and very kind, but just like ever since then, speed bumps tilt her pretty badly, and we can be affected for the rest of our lives. Again, I don't know that I'd call that a full PTSD, but that's partly because I'm not a doctor and I'm not educated to make that decision. But certainly there is post-traumatic stress, and it does change your worldview, and it changes who you are. But I also like to kind of sit here as again, example sounds a little like, arrogant, but to show that you can come from something like that is this huge, terrible thing in a family, and you can still move past it. You can still grow, and you can learn to accept it. And it's sad, and it's something that was difficult, but I'm not hurting from it day to day. I have moved on and accepted that into the pattern of my life, and the story that is me and that is a chapter. But it doesn't control me. And so I know that particularly when you're in the healing stages of that, and even worse when you're thinking that you should be done healing, but you're really just getting into it, the 6 months, a year down the road, when you're like, oh, I've handled all this, and it's about to bitch slap you in the face.
Yep.
You kind of you start to have that question of like, am I ever going to get past this? And you work with professionals, you do what you can, and you can.
Yep.
There is a question from chat that I did want to clarify or answer pretty quickly. Nia Onyx asked, basically, when is it the right time to contact a hospital versus go see your doctor or therapist or whatever? And basically, my answer, and you can clarify on this, but if you are in any sort of active crisis or place where you are in danger to yourself or to others, then you should always seek that is a medical crisis, seek medical emergency assistance. Go to a hospital, call 911. If you cannot guarantee your own safety from yourself, then that is a perfectly legitimate reason to get on the phone with the emergency services and say, I am a danger to myself, I need help. Mm-hmm. If you feel like you are not actively a threat, but you are feeling overwhelmed and having a hard time envisioning going on and stuff, but you can make it the days to wait for the doctor's visit, then that's probably the better route in the longer term. But if you are in active crisis or you cannot guarantee that you don't want to hurt yourself or someone else, then by all means, that is an emergency. Contact emergency services. That's my take.
I would agree with that. There's a stopgap between those two things that sometimes folks forget about, which is the hotline.
Right.
If you, but yeah, like if you know for sure that you're in trouble, make sure 911 emergency room. Those are key. If you are in need of support in a way that you're not sure whether you need to go to the hospital, but it definitely feels more stressful than being like, well, I could wait till next Monday for an appointment. Then the National Suicide Prevention Hotline is there 24 hours a day. That is it routes to a local crisis center that a person who is trained will talk to you. It's very important to realize this, that like the people who work the National Hotline are trained. They're not just random folks that are taking phone calls. They know how to handle crisis situations. You also don't have to be suicidal to call the hotline. You could also just have fleeting thoughts. You could be really thinking about it. There's no qualifier that makes it so that you either can or can't call the hotline. But the hotline is with somebody who can help de-escalate a little bit, can listen to you, will be there to hear what you have to say, can help you get in touch with whatever types of resources you may need in that moment, including intervention from medical services or the police, or might be able to talk you through a plan that can get you through the night so that you can make some calls in the morning or later that day or whenever it is that you call. So there are hotlines all over the world. And I have an extensive list of them in my Discord, but there also Wikipedia has a list of international hotlines if people are interested.
Yeah.
That you
I have a list of many in my about panel. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that there are probably more, and but yeah, it's basically you evaluate it based on the literally it's just the level of urgency. It's kind of as weird as it is. It's the same as can this cut wait until tomorrow to go see the doctor, or do I need to get it stopped? Is it bleeding right now? And it's kind of the same thing, but at a mental health level. But some people, I think that, or if not, let's qualify it as most people need to understand that that you can absolutely be in a emergency medical emergency without it being I'm about to bleed out situation. That you can be in a mental crisis that requires medical emergency. But
that is true. I also want to make sure that people know this as well, that it's very important to have proper expectations for what these different levels of intervention are capable of. Medical intervention is likely to be the most standardized in terms of what's going to happen in terms of like hospital, ER, all these sorts of things. You have medical professionals that are working there that deal with these types of things all the time. I guarantee you there is almost nothing you're going to throw at EMTs and medical professionals that they have not seen before, and they are totally prepared to deal with that. Sometimes people will call the hotline expecting that they are going to receive therapy. And it is very important to understand that the National Suicide Prevention Hotline and crisis lines are not therapy. The person on the other end of the phone might be a therapist, but even if they are, they're not your therapist, but very likely is not a therapist. And sometimes people will call the hotline with an expectation that they're going to receive like intervention in the form of what a therapist would be able to do after like months of assessment. And that is not what that's for. It's for acute problem solving, crisis de-escalation. A therapist is the person who's going to be able to do a full contextual assessment of what it is that's gone on in your life and how you've reacted to it and what sort of things are happening in your life right now. And that's an important thing to understand. Also, because I know that there are going to be questions about this, I've seen some alluding to it in both chats. One or two not so great experiences with hotlines, therapists, medical professionals does not predict future unrelated interactions with those folks. So if you've had a poor experience, I hate that you had a poor experience. I hope nobody ever has a poor experience calling a hotline or going to the hospital or seeing a therapist. But unfortunately, due to the nature of how complex human relationships are, those things happen. If you allow a poor instance or two to prevent you from seeking out help from people who very well could intervene in a very good and important and meaningful way in your life, whether it's at the crisis level or whether it's at the therapy level, don't let that happen. If you had a bad experience as a kid in Tennessee and you now live in California, your experience in Tennessee does not predict what's going to happen in California. And it's a trick that our brain plays on us to help us try to anticipate everything in our life by taking our past and assuming that's what's going to happen in the future. And that's not how it works. It's disheartening a lot of times to see how many people will prevent themselves from accessing care or seeking out help because they had a not so great experience. And I've also been on the other end of people telling me when they've gotten to me, for example, where they've been like, oh my God, I'm glad that I called. I've had some not so great experiences, but I had a good one, whether it was on the hotline or even if it's in therapy, and I've had a good one here, and I'm really grateful for that. So, and I will always say to that person, it's amazing that you pushed through and that you made that happen for yourself and that you kept going, because we can't expect that everything's going to go perfect at all times. It's just not realistic. So I could see people talking about that. So I always like to make that point because it's such an important one.
Yeah, and I think that expands out, well, not just from the hotline, but you kind of mentioned it, but it's worth calling out specifically that your interactions, your experiences with therapy in general, you're not going to necessarily find your therapist on your first visit to a therapist.
Correct.
Any therapist who's decent is going to understand completely if you say, you know what, it didn't click, I'm going to keep looking, or even if you just, don't reschedule another session, you say, I think I'm going to, whatever it is you want to say, they're going to understand. They're not going to take it personally. And if they do or they don't, if they do take it personally or they don't understand, then you're making the right call and finding someone different. So it really, but you've, like, as weird as it is, you're shopping around for someone who connects with you and understands, and you feel like you have that ability to open up to them and that they understand you and can respond to you in a way that you can hear, because we all hear in different ways and we all speak in different ways, and some of us speak in a way, Ryan can be saying all the perfect things and someone's just sitting there going like, I don't get it, I'm sorry, I don't understand, I heard noises coming out of your mouth, none of it clicked. And you're like, cool, all right, well
maybe I'm not a good fit.
Then I've got some other recommendations, or I hope you find someone in network, whatever. And that's okay. And it's also okay, and I actually had this conversation with my therapist, because I go to therapy every 2 weeks, but I had a conversation with him just the other day, which was basically at times it's okay, well, I have my appointment, but nothing's gone wrong in my life. I don't have anything like nothing. I'm not really specifically working through trauma. Like it's more just kind of like helping to handle current stuff. It's okay for me to say, hey, I'm good this week. I'll see you in a couple weeks and we'll try again. And he's not going to be mad. Like, he's cool. Glad you're doing well.
As long as you give us 24 hours notice or whatever your service agreement says.
Of course. But you need to be willing to put in the work to kind of find someone. And then this also extends past that to an area where Ryan can't say a damn thing, which is medication. It's the medications that you try aren't necessarily going to fit. They react differently with different people, and that's probably in my opinion, my personal opinion, anecdotally and experientially.
Yes, experientially. Yes, yes. Keep going.
Hang on.
Perfect word.
You guys can't see it off screen, but I'm flipping him off on the just holding up a hand right over here. It's fine.
I love the word. That's why I wanted to draw more attention to it.
Yeah. But one of the worst things about the process is trying to find the right medication and finding that. And then over time, it might change to where it's not. I actually have, and I've had to wait forever. This is one of the more obnoxious things that's going on right now is psychiatrist appointments are months out, basically across the country. Obviously, we're speaking of the U.S. healthcare system, and if you're in a different locale, then your experience is going to be different. But I've waited months, but it's time to reassess my medication. I'm finding that I'm having more breakthrough days where I know myself well enough to go, I should be handling this better than I am, and that sort of thing. And so I'm going to start that process and start trying to finding that out. And it sucks because you're changing your brain chemistry. So you take this medication and you're going to feel all sorts of wacky for about 2 weeks. And then the next 2 weeks, you're going to think, oh, okay, this isn't doing anything. And the next 2 weeks, you're going to find out just what it's doing. Like, it's a process and it sucks. But what I always want to clarify when talking about the parts that suck of this is your entire life, you exist in the pursuit of your own happiness. That is the fundamental number one rule of what you should be doing for yourself. And I believe this with my entire being, that you should be trying to make yourself happy. I prefer that you not do it at other people's expense, but ultimately you need to be seeking the things that make you the happiest in your life and that can give you the most satisfying life. And this step, going through this process, even if it's difficult, is a very key and important step. If you've been diagnosed with depression and you're dealing with this, to resolving that and finding your happiness. If you decide it's not worth it to you, you are deciding that being happy is not worth it to you. And I cannot stress enough that is the most asinine conclusion you can come to, and that you should be very open to putting in the work. It sucks. Do it. You'll be happier on the other side, and you'll be thankful once you're there. So, sorry.
Oh no, that's so I it's interesting because you and I have had this conversation before, and I
mean, one of my concerns with these conversations is just it's like sometimes it's like we've said most of this.
No. I mean,
but it's good to recover.
So, no, I mean even offline, you and I have talked about this a bit, and I actually I think you and I defer slightly on it, although I think we're in general agreement on it. But there's some slight aspects of it that maybe I like to add as addendums to that, which is that the first is that happiness is perceived relative to other experiences, and so a lot of times folks, I was just talking about this on stream the other day, folks that expect a constant stream of happiness, which I know is not what you are advocating for at all, but folks who who think that they should experience a constant stream of pleasure and happiness, what they don't realize is that if that was to actually happen, if we could actually make sure that you always experienced elation, your brain would habituate to it. Mm-hmm. And it would no longer, because happiness also needs to come along with novelty in order for it to be something that perpetuates. And a lot of people don't realize that like you have to actively work toward a pleasurable experience in your life, and you also have to recognize that in relation to moments in your life where you will inevitably experience discomfort and adversity, that those two things don't exist without each other. Otherwise, it all is just one experience that just never changes, and you don't experience it in the way that you think you're going to. And so that's one thing. And
I actually, if I can,
yeah, go for it.
One of the things that I when people are out talking about, I'm having a really hard time is I like to tell them, like, understand that this really difficult time that you are in is a moment of your life, and that moment will pass. But because you've had this really difficult time, because you know how much this sucks, when you get to the good parts of your life, when you get to those good moments, you're going to be so much more thankful and so much more appreciative, because you know how far you've come. You see how much you've grown and how great it is, compared to if you never experience adversity, then you don't know it to recognize and understand joy. So
yep. And to piggyback off of that, because this is where you and I are just bread and butter here, baby. You and I, we're just leapfrogging each other here. It's great. So
right.
Just to bring as many animal metaphors.
No. I see what you did there. I didn't think that'd work, but I actually pulled it off. I'm kind of happy. I was halfway through it.
You subverted my expectations on that one, dude.
There was no way I'm delivering this, and I was like, boom, nailed it.
That was good.
Anyway.
That was good. That was good. I appreciate that one. So another thing too these are usually happen in the context of very heavy conversations, usually in a therapy room, and so I like whenever there's an opportunity to talk about this in that space. Is happiness can be terrifying for certain people. One of the things that happens when we talk about habituation is particularly with depression, wants you to do this. And depression wants you to build an entire identity around it. It's just it's how that mechanism works. But there are other states of being, so to speak, that we will build our conscious self and subconscious self around. And people become accustomed to that. So anxiety and depression are probably the two most common examples. So people who live in sort of a perpetual state of anxiety will habituate to that. They'll get used to it. They know what it means. They may hate it, but at least they know what it means. Same thing with depression. Depression can get so soaked into every part of your life that it's easy to know who you are when you're depressed. You know what it's like to be down. You know what it's like to be reclusive. You know what it's like to hate on certain things. You know what it's like to not have interest in something that you should have interest in. All those fun things that come along with depression. And so sometimes when folks will come to therapy, for example, to work through something like depression, when we start to introduce the idea that maybe depression doesn't have to be something that just seeps into every aspect of your life and that it's something that could be managed, the question of, well, then what, terrifies people. Like the idea of being satisfied, or the idea of being joyful about something, or connected to things, finding a hobby or something that you're really into, feeling a general sense of safety. In the case of folks who maybe have developed like PTSD or have had post-traumatic stress, that is foreign. And so when things are perceived by our brain as foreign, we get anxious.
Right.
And so we generally will shy against it. We don't like to open ourselves up to new experiences and new opportunities. As much as people love the idea of change and development and novelty, humans actually hate it. It's the antithesis.
Love change, except they hate doing
except
it
they
themselves.
hate it. Yep, because it's the antithesis to survival in some ways. It's risky
Right.
to change. When you know what you got and you are generally surviving in what you got, your brain's like, all right, cool, we're good. We can survive to procreate and get to death. We're good. And we are not at a spot evolutionarily anymore where that's the core sense of what it is that we're trying to achieve. We're now at a place where we have a prefrontal cortex. We like abstract things. We like happiness. We like satisfaction. We like safety. Things in some ways that many of us can take for granted at this point. And so it makes it hard when we're working through things like depression or sadness or just general angst about stuff to look at what's possible if it wasn't present anymore. And the amount of times I will ask that question of like, well, what do you think what your life would be like? What do you envision your life is if you're managing depression more effectively? 90% of the time, a person's not going to be able to answer that question. And we have to spend a lot of time answering that question and getting that person open to the idea that it is possible. It's going to take some work. And the work that it's going to take for you is going to be entirely different than the work that somebody else who's sitting right next to you would have to do. You know, my path to fulfillment and happiness looks entirely different than your path to fulfillment and happiness, despite the fact that you and I are, attempting to get toward a similar thing where in general we feel a sense of comfort and satisfaction in the things that we've managed to achieve for ourselves. So
No, Yeah, and that's all like you talk about kind of how the different impressions of depression and how it builds a thing. Like for me, it's interesting. I mean, I don't like literally have a name for it, but depression to me is a companion, like an involuntary one, but it is always there telling me things, trying to get me to feel things, and I see it actively working. And that's one of the most interesting things about it is it's like understanding depression is based around I mean, like chronic depression is based around our life's traumas and stuff, but also it's biology and chemicals in the brain, and basically they're being, you're talking about your serotonin and there's another pseudo serotonin or something like that, norepinephrine, or I don't know, there's SNRIs, and I can't remember what they do, but at any rate, there's different levels of chemicals that biologically affect your mood. And so it's like this is really hard to quantify, but it's like it's not that I actively feel it, but I can tell. I've looked at myself, and I can tell when an emotion is kind of either supplemented or encouraged by depression versus whether it is a reasonable thought. And so it is someone that is, and then you take your internal dialogue or whatever, and you add it to it, and it gives it almost this sentient being that's trying to actively work against me. And depression has these things that's just amazing, the way that it wants to build itself. Yep. And it seems like it's sentient, because what's one of the worst things you can do if you're depressed is lock yourself up in a dark room and sit there and not move and not exercise and not experience sunlight, but just sit in a dark room and just dwell. That's one of the literal worst things that you could do if you're in a depressive episode.
All depression wants you to do.
Imagine my surprise when you're feeling it, all you want to do is find yourself in a dark room thinking about how shitty your life is. And that's really one of the things that stands out to me, is a lot of people, when they're, kind of have, varying levels of depression or just difficulties or whatever, they don't realize that you create these patterns for yourself, that you reinforce it in yourself. Because the reality is when you're feeling bad, when you're feeling crappy and the world's against you, you want to sit there and you want to think about how crappy the world is and how much it is against you. And you want to dwell and wallow in it. You want to feel as shitty as you can because you feel shitty, and you just really just want to reinforce with yourself that you are living in a septic world of crap, and that's what you do. And we follow these habits where we cut ourselves off from our friends, we withdraw, we stop being open, we start convincing ourselves that our friends don't like us, we become moody and irritable and push people away because they don't really want us around anyway, so we start pushing them away to kind of self-actualize that. We've put on, this is a big one that a lot of people kind of miss, at least from what I can tell. We put
really quick,
on
before you make that point, I really have to pee, and I want to make sure I can pay attention to what you're saying. So I'm going to pee really quick. Keep talking. I'll be right back in like 30 seconds.
Okay.
Keep going.
No problem. Hi guys, how you doing? Hey Dane, how are you? So it's really interesting to see how you've built a level of understanding of yourself that helps you gauge what is reasonable. I can imagine without the help and self-awareness, it can be easy to not be able to identify what level of action is reasonable. One of the things that I have always been, hi Pasmio, one of the things that and also hi Dr. Mick's chat on the red side, hello everybody. But one of the things that's always been interesting to me is I feel not unique, obviously, but fairly different in that I am staggered, frankly, by the number of people that I have encountered in my life who just they live from emotion to emotion, and they have no idea why they're feeling it. They just feel it and they do it. So Dr. Mick's back, but I was just I was reading a comment just from Claire about how I kind of self-realized and could identify these emotions and stuff. And I was just making the point that it always surprises me how few people really take the time to look inside themselves of why they're feeling a feeling. And where that feeling is coming from. And like my survival has kind of been built off of it in a way. I mean, but just I'm not terribly happy. Why not? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Like I've got a binder here in my head. It's like, let me pick flip to page 3 of all the shit that's happened today, and subsection C, you can see, you didn't call me back, like, or whatever. Yeah. Like, I've got this cat, I look at the emotions, and because there's so many of them that are kind of false. But to come back, hopefully I can pick up where I was going. Let's see, we were talking.
I was gonna say you better, because otherwise I'm gonna soapbox real hard on emotions. You get me going on that, and
give me a prompt. What was I was just about to make my most poignant point. The sentience of depression. The
sentience of depression, right there.
The thing that people miss is your music. You have a playlist of songs that make you feel shitty. When I feel down, I play this playlist, and that song is toxic, or that playlist is toxic to you. Those songs are great. Stop listening to them when you're shitty, because that is reinforcing you. It's Pavlovian. It's like creating this response. I listen to "She Will Be Loved" by Maroon 5 when I feel down, and you know why? Because it helps me realize how down I feel, and it feeds on itself and perpetuates itself. And so many of you are like feeling a little called out right now because you do it. You got to think about it. Your songs that you play when you're feeling bad to make you feel better don't make you feel better. They reinforce that you should feel sad. Anyway, go for your emotions.
Okay. This is why I can't listen to "I Want It That Way" by the Backstreet Boys.
I'll sing that for you. That's one of my signature songs. I'll go there.
You know what? Fun little aside here for a second. I never appreciated the Backstreet Boys when I was young, because my sister loved them, and I just couldn't love anything that my sister loved.
Of course. And
I was just, was curmudgeon-y, annoying teenage boy in the 90s and early 2000s. But holy shit, at 32 years old, there is a reason they were as big as they were. My God, do I look back, I'm like, damn, that shit's good. That is good stuff. So I have a whole new appreciation for stuff I used to hate just because my sister didn't love it. So, okay, anyway. Emotions. So, Claire and everybody else. Emotions are something that I spend an immense bulk of my time helping people reevaluate and consider differently. And part of that is what Zine has already described, and I'm going to go with it a little more, and I promise I won't talk for the next 15 minutes, so stop me at any point if I'm getting too far in this. But there is absolute reason to understand where your emotions are coming from. That can be incredibly helpful. So open that binder to page 3 and know exactly where it is, as Zine was describing, can be very helpful. If you know exactly where it came from, it gives you something to problem solve. It gives you something to go figure out how to navigate and deal with. And that can be a really nice thing. If you know it's because your friend didn't call you back, that's an opportunity for you to go discuss with your friend that they didn't call you back and that it hurt, and to have a really nice interaction with them. However, even if you can't figure out where an emotion is coming from, it doesn't make it any less valid, because at the end of the day, whether you want to experience it or not, you are experiencing it. The experience of an emotion is validation enough that emotion is valid, if that makes sense. Like, you are, by virtue of the fact that you feel sad, it's valid that you feel sad, because you do. And so many people get wrapped up in these narratives of what should I feel, how should I feel, what would be more appropriate, what would be more reasonable. Doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, it's not about what you should feel, it's about how you do feel. If you're sad and you think you should be mad, well, there's a reason you're not mad. It's because you're sad. It's because there's some learned experience, an amalgam of things that have contributed to your interpretation of a given event, whether you know exactly which event that is or not, or current moment. Your brain is registering sadness for some reason. And what that provides for all of us is a template through which we make the next 2 decisions, which is, how do we make meaning of that emotional experience, and what do we do with it? Something that I know I've talked about ad nauseum in these conversations, so I'm not going to go too far down that line, but like, you don't get to decide your emotional experience. You get to decide what you do with it. You get to decide how you make meaning of it. You get to decide what context to put it in. And that's why knowing where it's coming from is helpful, because basically the environment gives you the context. Oh, I know I'm frustrated right now because my car broke down. Great. If you have a day where all of a sudden you wake up and you're just in a shitty mood and you don't know why, that can be very odd, right? And then we usually get on ourselves about that. I shouldn't feel this way because I have no reason. Well, it doesn't matter. You feel it. So let's figure out what you're going to do. Let's validate that the emotion is there, and then let's figure out where you're going to go and what you're going to do. And validating an emotional experience doesn't mean you're agreeing with it. It doesn't mean you have to like it. You can validate sadness, you can validate depression, anxiety, all these sorts of things without saying, I love that I'm anxious. It's just saying, I'm anxious right now, and so my entire day or this moment is a moment that I have to operate while I'm experiencing this given emotion. What does that mean for me? And as a therapist, I help people look for patterns in that. So what does anxiety tend to do to you? What does depression tend to do to you? Depression tends to make me want to go just crawl up in my turtle shell. It makes me look at my phone. It makes me, push all my water and food away, right? Like that's what I want to do. Okay, well, what's the more ideal set of behaviors in this moment? Well, I really need to write this cover letter. And so how do you do that? You break it down into these manageable chunks. And it's like, yeah, you're going to have to write a cover letter right now while you're depressed. That's going to be really difficult to do, but it's also something that you have control over. And if we relinquish and do some of these things that depression wants us to do, as Zine alluded to earlier, you can actually perpetuate depression and anxiety by the way that you respond to it. So instead of trying to curate your experience up front, focus more on how you respond to your experience on the back end, and you will find that you experience an immensely larger sense, what a stupid way to put that, a larger sense of control in your life than you will if you're constantly trying to intercept emotional experiences you don't even know whether you're going to have. I cannot stress that enough. Like, as soon as people move into a space where they can just, oh, okay, so I'm feeling frustrated. That's okay. I must be frustrated for some reason. Do I know what that reason is? Yes, cool. No. Okay, well, it doesn't change the fact that I'm frustrated, so let me figure out how I want to deal with this. Unbelievably amazing life skill that all of us need to have.
Yeah, and I mean, you bring up things that I probably need to work on being more clear about, because as you're saying, when I look at and evaluate my emotions, it's not that I'm never like saying I'm not feeling that, or it's never even like I shouldn't be feeling that. It's I shouldn't. For me, it's recognizing that the emotional response is outsized compared to the stimuli. Basically, for me, it's like I shouldn't. This shouldn't have hit me that hard. It doesn't mean that it didn't. I have been hit that, but then I kind of look at it and say, so let me unpack this. But absolutely, it's not about and honestly, about a little while ago, I actually went through a point, and it involved not a therapy call, but a call with a friend that was, when I contacted Ryan and we talking to him, 3 a.m. in the morning, and I basically was like, look, I'm a grown ass man. I shouldn't be feeling the way that I am this way, and basically falling into that exact trap. And he did exactly what he's just done, of like, basically like, you're gonna feel emotions whether you want to or not. It doesn't matter whether you're a grown ass man or not. So
doesn't matter.
maybe it's time to start figuring out how to deal with those emotions rather than going, why am I feeling them? And I was like, okay, but why you gotta be mean to me, man? Why you gotta call me names? Why you gotta call me out like that?
We spent so much time in the shoulds, man.
Yeah, no, and so it was like, I should be in control. I should be this. I should be that. And it's like, you know what that got me? Worrying all that concern? Not a damn thing. It wasn't until I started addressing and handling what was, instead of thinking about what should be, that I really started making progress. And that might actually piggyback into a question that what Penny, I believe, had in chat, which was asking about Pirate Kitty, sorry, not Penny, how to address regrets, since they don't help but can be quite invasive. And I don't really have like a very comprehensive answer to that, so I'm hoping that you can take that one. But I think that dovetails. I think that dovetails well with what we're talking about right now.
Does. Okay. Regret and guilt sit on the same plane of existence. And so please know that as I talk about regrets, folks, I'm also talking about guilt. This is something that tends to blow people's minds when I say it, but regret and guilt are not feelings. They are judgments. And so many of us are conditioned, and it's represented, to think that guilt is an emotional experience, that regret is an emotional experience. They aren't. when we engage in regret narratives, as I call guilt narratives, basically what we're saying is that I should have done X, or this thing should be this. It's very hard to talk about guilt and regret without saying the word should. And what that is it's casting judgment on ourselves for decisions that were already made using hindsight information in order to make that judgment, which is wholly unfair. That is like saying I could have won the lottery if I had only known what numbers were going to come up. Like if I came back at you and said, oh, well, I know what the Powerball numbers were going to be because I was there when I saw what they were, like, who cares, right? Like, that doesn't do anything for me. So to have the information you have subsequent to something that you regret is information that you should use to direct toward the future, as opposed to trying to manipulate the past. And so many people go through these what ifs that are very past oriented. What if, for me, one I've dealt with for a long time, what if I hadn't missed my graduate school interview at Purdue Northwest because I was playing Mass Effect 3? That was one that spun around in my head for a long time.
That's a thought that's gonna fester.
You know, funny story about that. In my doctoral program, I actually, when I was doing my dissertation, I interviewed the program director of, not the program director, one of the faculty members of that program, and he's like, wait a minute, you're from Indiana? Why didn't you go to Purdue Northwest? And I was like, funny story, I missed the interview. He goes, I remember you! Holy shit, I'm really glad you're doing okay. Anyway, so but I said it was good resolution to that, but I regretted that one for a long time. So anyway, what that is we sit there and I go, well, what if I had set my alarm? What if I had done this? I should have been more prepared. I should have done these things. No matter how much energy and time I put into that, it is never going to change what already happened, ever. There's nothing we can do to change the past. And all I'm doing is borrowing from the present, which I actually can influence, and the future, which I can influence through the present, in order to bash my head against a wall. So what we want to do is ask ourselves, what can I learn from this thing that I wish had gone differently? And how does that influence some of the decisions I make now and going forward? And you bet your ass I put my meetings that are very important on 3 different calendars now, because I never want to be in the situation that I was in when I missed that graduate school interview. And I still get tinges of that anxiety when I play Mass Effect 3, because I remember what that felt like the moment I realized it was the wrong day. And I think it's really important for us to do that. And the reason that I say that regret and guilt are narratives instead of feelings is because feelings, as Zine and I have talked about immensely here, are not really changeable, aside from, like, they can be latently changed by how we respond to them. Your narratives can. You can instantly change your narrative about something. There is nothing that requires any of us to tell ourselves a certain thing about a certain thing. You can change your narrative about something right now. And so to make that shift from past to present and future is one of the ways that we would deal with that, because as Pirate Kitty alluded to, it's not really helpful to steep ourselves in regrets if all we're doing is just thrusting ourselves back into the past. So that's my answer for that one.
Thrusting. No, like, and that's actually, like, I kind of deal with some of that just brought it up with just an anecdotal for me of I have, and I showed it to Captain Sparkles, Jordan, one of the when we were having a conversation about Bitcoin. Bitcoin had recently hit like $60,000 a coin, and had and it slid down to 45 or whatever. I mean, it's all over the place, but it was fair. And I showed him that I got into Bitcoin in 2023 or somewhere in there. No, 2023. That's a little bit ahead of the future.
That's next year.
That's next. 2003, somewhere in there. Like 10 plus years ago, I had been into Bitcoin, and I had bought miners, and I had gotten into it, and I showed him a part of just a screenshot of my transaction history with Coinbase, which is an exchange site where I had bought 6 Bitcoin for $60, and that same day I sold them for $120. And what you're talking about is that, like, you can't beat yourself over hindsight. Like, I can sit there and think all I want of, oh my God, what would that have been? You know, like I could have, like, you know, for 6 Bitcoins, you know, like, think of the money. But
it's a lot of pizza.
the reality is, I have another one with that, but the reality is,
Oh my God.
I turned around in that same day and I made 100% profit on a trade in that day. That was a hell of a trade.
That's a great return.
I screwed up. It's not that I did anything wrong. I made a great profit on the information that I had. I did great. I don't feel bad about it. Yeah, it'd have been great if things would have worked out. And actually, the reality, the nice thing is, I did get a little bit lucky because when I cashed out, there's one of the big exchanges turned out to have been committing fraud. I mean, all things Bitcoin end with, turns out they were committing fraud and stole everything. That's how
it's amazing what happens when things are unregulated.
Ever ends. But regardless, so it turns out, you know, the main exchange at the time went belly up, went out of business, and there's actually still a, you know, what is it, Chapter 11, like bankruptcy hearing still going. I still get emails about them to this day. That's still happening. And then I was just like, this is bullshit, and I cashed out, and I like went to every place. And an interesting thing about Bitcoin is that, you know, you have 1 Bitcoin, but you can actually divide it infinitely, right? You can add another point, and so you can have 1 Bitcoin, or else you can have 0.01296 of a Bitcoin, and that's fine. That's still worth whatever that is times the value of a Bitcoin. And I had transferred, when I decided I'm out, I transferred everything to the one exchange and sold out, but left all that, what they call it, dust, you know, these little points lying around everywhere. And then at some point, about when it hit 10,000 or something, I was like, didn't I, you know, I mean, this is 10 years later or whatever, didn't I? And it went, and, you know, most of them had shut down, but those few places that I had accounts that still had stuff lying around, I gathered together what at the time wasn't worth transferring and paying the fee to transfer. Now I don't mind having that next to my name, you know? And so like crypto's an interesting thing. I also, the same thing with the Dogecoin. I got really into Dogecoin. I had literally 120 some odd thousand Dogecoin at one point because it was worthless. You could get 10,000 in a day kind of thing. In fact, I had so much Dogecoin that I have transactions of me sending it to a bot on Reddit that would just allow you to tip good posts, you know, like, here, have 5, like I had sent like 5,000 Dogecoin. So when Dogecoin spiked to like 75 cents a thing, I'm going, what did I do with all my Dogecoin?
All those Reddit bots are making it laugh into the bank.
I found my old wallet, and Bitcoin, like the crypto is stupid. Like, it's great, it's intelligent. I understand. Like, I don't know, it's stupid. The way that it works when you're starting from dirt is basically you download the program, and there's ways to short circuit it or kind of do shortcuts. But basically, you're like, all right, I've got the program, now start sending me the blockchain, the ledger. And you just start, and it shows you in the bottom, you're like, you're 17 years behind. And, you know, and you wait for a day, and it's like, now you're 16 years, you know, like it literally just downloads transaction after transaction and rebuilds the blockchain for you, like from dirt. If you don't, like, you can go, there's people that have published, like, here's it up to 2010, and you can download that, and then you'll start from you're only 11 years behind. But it's stupid the way that works. But I'm sure there's many smart people say this is exactly why, and they're complaining about me saying it. It's stupid as a real person. But so I found my old wallet, and so I started this process, and I got to where it was like I had brought all the, and my wallet's sitting there, and like I'm seeing stuff moving. I'm like, okay, and stuff's coming in, some of it's going out, and then it stops because I know that I just walked away. Dogecoin was stupid. I walked away. And so it stopped, and I just had like 75,000 left in this account. And, Dogecoins right now, or when I'm looking at this, like, worth 60 cents per. And I'm going, it's still not a bad day's work, like adding the math, carry the one, that's at least $20, like it's, 75,000 times 60, that's, $35,000, $40,000 worth of Dogecoin. And for over a year, this wallet sits with that, and I'm just watching it. It's like, it's up to 2017, 2000, and it's just like, and I'm like, just long enough of no activity to where I'm like, this is when I walked away. This is just sitting there. Nothing else happened. And then it turned out 2018, apparently I went back to it, and I was like, this is never going to be, and flushed it out and got rid and sold out for like, whatever it was at that time. But it was just long enough that I had started to buy that new car, maybe get a pony for the backyard or something. I don't know.
Little pony, yeah.
Little pony. Butt Stallion says hello.
So
but Anyway, none of that's mental health other than just...
No, but it will be because I'm about to make it.
Oh, you bring
ready?
That,
you
bring
ready?
It home, baby.
I'm bringing it back. All right.
Yeah.
Because and I'm going to share just a quick story that's similar, just so that it all kind of comes together here. So I like to play parlays and put like $2 on parlays on sports betting just because it's fun for me. And I recently hit a 7-team parlay that was $2 that paid out like 65. And I had the thought of, man, if only I'd have put 20 on that parlay, I could have had $600 and some, right? Or, whatever, right? You use, again, hindsight is really scary, not just because of what it means for how we conceptualize our past, but what it means for certain decisions that we make going forward. Because if we have some of these instances, like you had with Bitcoin, or like I have with this parlay, it can actually lead to us making really stupid decisions going forward because we assume that it is also going to happen here in the future. And this connects a little bit like with what I was talking about with how like past instances with therapists don't predict future instances. Past investment experiences don't necessarily predict future investment experiences or otherwise. And this is actually what gets people screwed in gambling, because if you win, particularly, and I know you enjoy a gamble here and there, as do I. But like what can happen is when people win, they can use their hindsight knowledge of that win, where maybe the next parlay that I engage in for a 17 parlay, I decide to put $20 down because I'm super confident coming off of the one parlay that I just hit for 2. But what happens if I can't really afford $20, and the likelihood is I'm going to lose that $20 because really parlays are not easy to hit, nor is it easy to find an investment that's going to have 100% return within a short window of time. So what happens is people will start to make these decisions that are counter to their well-being because they're using hindsight. So we have to be very careful to make sure that the decisions we make in a given moment are informed decisions that are based off of more than just nodal instances of things that have happened to us, that are instead the product of careful thought, some intuition. I mean, it's okay to have like like Dogecoin, for example, or whatever. Like if you feel some sort of like emotional pull to it and you want to give it a shot, cool.
Sure.
But people will start to make like legitimately life-changing decisions sometimes based on completely unrelated events and data. That is, I mean, I think of people who will try to couple with a person who is completely different than either one of their parents because they don't like their parents. That doesn't mean that you're going to have a more meaningful experience because you're doing something in spite of something else. It's very important for us to take the specific data of a given moment and use that data in order to make decisions as best we can, or else we can get into trouble. So is in the same way that hindsight can make it really hard with regrets, hindsight can also make it very difficult for our future if we're not careful and we're not putting the things that happen to us into a very specific context. Because our brains are wired to close gaps in our environment. Like we want to be able to have the answer to everything that happens so that we can easily anticipate what it is that's going to happen for us. And the brain sometimes does this passively and sometimes it does it actively, where, somebody who, if you've seen somebody, for example, if you've seen somebody drown and then you see somebody who's swimming, who's kind of flailing around a little bit, you might instantly have an emotional reaction to that thinks that person is drowning, because that is your brain's way of trying to like close that gap. Or you might be afraid of somebody close to you going swimming because you've seen somebody you love drowned. Like, it's amazing the way that our brain tries to close those gaps, where really it's possible that this new person could drown, but it's also possible that they won't. And we can't make a definitive call either way. We have to actually use the information we have at hand. So that's my way of spinning that back into how we consider it from a mental health perspective or a psychological perspective.
And to spin that off from mental health and psychological to just random anecdotal, a couple things that come to mind. One is, if you haven't ever, it's actually really interesting, especially if you are going to be a parent or are a parent or just happen to be weird like me. There's actually, I can't tell you the exact URL, but I'm sure you could Google for it. But there's sites that actually test you on your ability to spot a drowning person in a like wave pool and stuff. And drowning does not look like what we're trained to expect from movies and TV. And it actually, in my opinion, like, you know, not that I ever expect to need to know, but it's actually kind of cool to get an idea of what it really
Useful
is
info.
and how it really happens, so that if ever I need it, I'm there, because it looks different. And figuring that out, I mean, you're talking like 10 minutes of just kind of like, oh, to kind of understand that, but it's actually really interesting there. But kind of going back to the gambling thing, there's I don't have a specific tie-in for mental health wise, but it is just from the way our brains work. It's interesting for me, and because I've always really enjoyed gaming. I understand the math is stacked against me. I don't have delusions about that, and I take what I can afford to lose when I go gaming and gambling, because I expect to lose it. But one thing when I'm there is, over time, it's like, well, these highs that you hit are great. How great would it have been if I could have been betting $1 instead of a quarter?
Yep.
And as I've moved on in life, I've been able to change my bet from, playing the penny slots at minimum to now, having slightly bigger bets or whatever, because I'm in a better financial place. But what's interesting is the dopamine reward is no better now. It just costs me more. I wish, but the thing is I can't go back either. Like if I go back to those old bets, those low bets, then it's not exciting. But because I've gotten accustomed and used to these bigger bets. But the reality is I had just as much fun playing with less money back before I knew to play with more money as I do now that I have bigger bets. But I unfortunately can't go backwards, and that's one of those like dickhead brain moments where your brain's like, I'm used to this, so it's not fun anymore.
Tolerance, baby. Yep.
God damn it. Yep. But yeah, no, like gambling is a lot more expensive for me, but it's just as fun as it always was. But that's because I have to spend more.
That, dude,
Anyway.
I love that you say that, though, because that's a perfect illustration of one of the things we talked about earlier, which is happiness needs novelty. And habituation is something that, like, once you've moved your thresholds in certain ways, there's novelty associated with that keeps it going. Like, in some ways, that's how tolerance goes. You see tolerance with things like nicotine, you see alcohol tolerances, like all these types of things. Like, the brain is designed to habituate to what it can expect at a given point in time. And it can be really a bummer. One of the more, like, we'll call it maybe one of the more, like, serious examples of the process that you're talking about here is there are a lot of veterans who will see active combat, which, by the way, active combat is probably one of the most physiologically arousing spaces a human could ever be in, because you're being shot at or you're threatened in some way, and all of your survival nodes are online. You have all these chemicals that are washing and like hormones going through your blood, like whole 9 yards. It's an incredibly it's just a ridiculous physiological experience. Well, what happens is if you experience that many times and you become habituated to that, a lot of times veterans, when they come back to civilian life, will find that they are incredibly depressed, or that it is very hard for them to get excited about anything.
That rush. Because
there's nothing that compares to being in active combat. And a lot of times that's why you'll see sometimes veterans will re-enlist. They'll go back into active duty. Because it's at least a way that they can feel alive. Like a lot of them will say, like, I feel like I'm dead since I came home, because my baseline got way too moved. And over time, the brain can sort of rehabituate down, but it requires significant amounts of time and discipline in order to, like, kind of remove yourself from some of those things. I mean, if you're talking about coming home from active combat, we're really just talking about civilian life over time. Right. But, like, it's also why a lot of veterans will go into, like, police service and stuff like that, because if there is really something to that, like the novelty of that, and it's something that doesn't, I think, really get talked about enough in terms of, like, just what general tolerances look like. We only talk about it as it relates to like chemicals and stuff, but yours is a real world example, right? Like all of a sudden betting $2 is not exciting, $20 is exciting. And so in order to get that because gambling is fun if you can afford to do it, and it's one of those things that like it's like, oh shit, like, but what does this mean for me? What does this mean for me if all of a sudden I don't have the same amount of money to play with when I gamble? Is all of a sudden the enjoyment gone? And now am I like, what does that mean for me? And like, it really can scramble folks up. So it's, you know, when we're talking about substances, by the way, if you build up a tolerance and then you go off of it, and then usually what people will do when they go back is they'll try to go back to the dosage that they were doing when they had tolerance, and that can actually kill people. So for anybody who's watching that's dealing with that, please keep that in mind. If you ever go off of a certain substance that you are addicted to, please work with doctors in order to navigate that space, because also same thing with like psychotropic medication and all that stuff. Like, it's very important to understand the way the brain habituates to things, and the way our body handles stuff, because we are slaves to our biology, friends. Like literally, it is like the real crux of everything we talk about as it relates to this stuff is like we are absolutely slave to biological processes that make us what we are. Humans like to believe that we are more than just a sack of cells and neurons and stardust, but we really aren't. That's all we are. Like when you experience something, it's because there's literally certain neurons and chemicals in your brain and in your blood. If you have a shock experience or whatever, it's because your sympathetic nervous system has just fired. Like you literally, like we are all just slaves to our biological processes, and that's why understanding the brain is so huge, because it can help really depersonalize some of these things that happen to us and gives us something to really work with, because it's like, oh wow, this really isn't like me as I've abstractly defined it. This is just what my body is doing, and that's what all of us is vesseled in, is our body. So it's important to understand the way these things affect, and that's why I really love some of the gut research that's coming out in terms of like how like some of your other parts of your nervous system and some of the parts of your gut actually can contribute to your mood and stuff like that. Like it's just fascinating how all of that comes together.
Yeah. The way that we fix this person is with a stool sample or stool transfer, and it's like we're like,
okay.
You know, and imagine being the doctor that like, I have an idea, and everyone else going,
bear with me on this, guys.
Sit the fuck down, Frank. Like, no, what the hell? And he's like, no, hear me out. But I realize that this can be a difficult thing for some people to acknowledge, but it's also a reality with this whole thing is that same thing that we're talking about with gambling or even with is a big part of that is in pornography. And, you know, pornography can be, you know, like my personal feelings are it's not inherently evil, and at times I find it quite enjoyable, but it's something that can be done with a partner or however you want to use it. I don't care.
However you'd like to consume it, yes.
Yeah, however you like to consume it. But one pitfall that you have to be careful with, and I actually found myself at a younger age, I know a friend who at a younger age had a problem where you become acclimated to, okay, this is a topless picture. And so then you start finding, you know, okay, now this is hardcore. Then you start finding and you start finding more and more extreme because you're looking for that hit of, is this going to do it for me? And what used to in the past does not now, until you hit a point where, or, you know, hopefully you hit a point where you go, oh my God, like, what am I doing? You know, that moment of shame, but you actually take steps to say, I'm stepping away from this and letting myself, my expectations and everything move back into a more reasonable, because this is outside of the realm of fantasy to where this is either exploitive or just, you know, like it's extreme at a point that you're reaching points of unhealthiness. And so the pornography addiction, it's very much can be a thing. But again, my personal belief is it's not inherently evil, and I really dislike how much we've stigmatized sex and the inability to talk about it without everyone going like, oh my God, you're talking about, you know,
I'm sure there were probably lots of people that cringed as soon as you said the word porn.
They're like, oh God, pornography. But the reality is, you know, and I, in addition to mental health advocacy, I think that, you know, we need to work on being more sex positive and realize literally all of us here are here because of sex, you know, and if you can take that back as far as you want until, you know, you go back to, all right, Robot Man, I think I'm a clone now. But you know, the one that I like to get people with is I was like, it's not guaranteed, but there's a high likelihood that at some point your mother looked back at your father and said harder, and people go don't make me think that
well, if we want to be really technical, technically all of us are really only here because of an ejaculation.
All right, fair enough.
Because there are other means of
Sure,
being able to do
right.
that. So yeah, but we still somebody had to do something to get that to come out. So at the very least, we are all the product of some orgasm in some way or another.
Yep.
So
Yep.
we are all the products of a.
We came in with a bang.
Yep. So
anyway.
Yeah.
So at any rate, but we're a little off the rails there, but nonetheless.
Well, if we look at this is why one of the things that I talk about so frequently, and I used to base an entire course around this is why expectations are so important for all of us to consider, because like even what you're talking about with porn, what that does, the porn, I worked with somebody who does a lot of porn research, and one of the things that you find when people are asked about porn in certain sophisticated ways is that it moves your expectations often without you realizing it, and that sex on the everyday front generally is nothing like porn, because porn is produced.
Speak
it is
for yourself, but okay, go on.
That's fair. So it's produced, though. It's about camera angles. It's about making sure that certain angles make certain things visible. There's splicing and cutting, and like there's all sorts of stuff that goes into producing this. And it is generally, even if you like read AMAs that porn stars will do or listen to interviews, like it's not always even pleasant. Like it's literally to produce
it's a job,
a product. Yeah. But when you're a 12-year-old boy, can't even imagine being a 12-year-old boy with the internet right now. Holy shit. But like, if you're a 12-year-old boy, or you're a 12-year-old girl, or a non-binary person, and you are consuming porn, you do not have the sophisticated understanding of knowing to put what you're seeing in context. And so what that does is you believe that that's just what sex is, and that's not an indictment on anybody who that happens to, but that's just what's been represented to you. And so a lot of times what folks will have happen is that when they engage in a actual sexual relationship or relationships, they will find that it does not meet the expectation that they have had injected into them in some ways, and that creates problems for them. And what also, even in a meta way, a lot of people first learn about sex in solitary confinement, so to speak. Like usually people aren't like masturbating in public or anything like that, and so you're not.
Speak for yourself.
Speak for yourself. Sorry, yes, most of us. But like you learn to engage with sex on your own frequently, and so that also creates problems for folks when they comes time to engage with sex with somebody around, because you're not used to that. One of the classic examples of this is, and I hear this all the time, I hear this a lot of times in heterosexual relationships, but it doesn't have to be, where men will not make noise when they have sex because they got habituated to masturbating while other folks were around in the home, and they needed to be quiet while they consumed porn. And that it is like they won't make noise because that's you learned how to engage with yourself sexually in a certain way, and there's these like passive ways that can come out, and it's kind of fascinating how that can affect people. And you will hear men in interviews will say, I don't make noise because I never did when I was learning how to engage with myself sexually. And it's really fascinating stuff.
I have an addendum to that, So I had a little bit of that problem where I was very quiet with my partner until I learned that, like feedback is good and stuff. I can tell you literally who did that to me and when and what they said to cause that. Robin Williams.
You could have given me 100 guesses, and that's not.
I know.
Boy, the timing on that.
So,
Jesus.
Robin Williams has a stand-up skit live at the Met. And I had watched that a lot. It is hilarious. And at one point, he's talking about sex because it's funny, and he's kind of, and he talks about how, you know, and I think I was probably 11, 12, whatever. And he talks about how he's like, you know, you ever notice that men just turn into some sort of goofy when they're hitting that big moment, you know, when they're like, you know, you're sitting there like, yes, 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 and then they hit that moment, they're like, oh, is this fun or what? Oh my god! And he just does a full Robin Williams skit. This is, you know, and just talks about how, and I was like, I'm not gonna be that idiot. And then it turns out you want to be that idiot, but it's like I very distinctly remember like that was a point in my little brain saying, well, I can do better than that. You know, I can avoid that moment. And it's it's interesting. Like I can literally go back and hit that and say, no, I 100% know that's where I was like, I am going to be
dead silent.
Not going to make those noises.
You will not know that I'm enjoying this.
And yeah, no. So Robin Williams ruined my sex life for a while, but I've you know, we've come around. But
that is
not
the
Robin
importance.
Williams and but.
That is the importance, though. Dude, I love when you tell these stories because it's so easy for me to connect these to things. That's the importance of representation, though, because what you learn when you watch something like that, again, as a young kid who doesn't have all of the, you know, experience that a older adult would have to be able to put these things in context, your immediate thought with how he describes that is undesirable, and I'm not going to do that. Right. And you don't have a diverse array of representation of sex to be able to go, oh, wait a minute, some people might like that, some people might not like that. What's truer to me? You take people that you admire or the representation you have, and you synthesize that into your expectations for what is supposed to happen. And like when we don't have experiences that align with those expectations, which I've said every single time we've done this, so I'm not going to go too far, it creates a not so great emotional experience called aversive arousal that is experienced as anxiety.
Is the term that I use to tease you with.
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
No normal person uses it, but you're absolutely right.
That's why I always like. That's why I now say, because of you and I talking, I now say also known as anxiety, because that's an easier thing for people to make sense
well,
of.
I mean, you know, like there's a certain point where it's like maybe make that a little bit more accessible. People don't know what you're talking about. Your aversive arousal. They're experiencing aversive arousal. Your comments about aversive arousal. So maybe clarify that a little bit.
Don't even get me started on inconsistency compensation.
Oh man. Yeah, no, Inconsistency compensation is the title of my biography.
That's for number 5. Yeah. That would not be a bad name for somebody's autobiography, which is kind of funny.
So most of chat's telling me that it should be titled "Robin Williams Ruined My Sex Life." That's a good one biography. Too. Yeah,
that's a good one too.
But yeah, so one of the interesting things, kind of, again, this is just a story off of that, but I find is we think of, you know, and particularly because kids are so exposed to the internet now as at a young age. But I remember, I mean, my brother died when I was 11, but I remember stealing his or looking at his girly magazines and being interested in them and not necessarily fully understanding what I was seeing, but knowing that I liked it, that I wanted to see it, that there was something interesting here. I swear to God, I'd even read the stories and articles in these, and you know, like to kind of get that, and you know, like that actually. I don't know whether this is just TMI or whatever, but it's like when I was dealing with that whole issue where porn had stopped really properly registering for me, and I realized like I needed to step away from it. Written erotica was actually the way that I went around to get to that, because it was very mentally, like I could build a story. It reestablished like kind of connections and stuff. It was a good way to bring my imagination back into it, which imagination needs to be a big part of it. So, but regardless, like I must have been 10, maybe even as young as 9, and I was still like, we think of, you know, oh, they're too young for that, but it's like these kids, like I can tell you, get curious a lot younger than we want to think. And so like the internet is a scary thing for a parent these days.
My best friend found a Playboy when I was in 4th grade, and that was the greatest day ever. So yeah,
4th grade, that's 9 years old. So yeah.
Now imagine now having the internet literally in your hands at all times with a phone. Like, I mean,
oh God,
Lord.
I mean, well, the internet in one of your hands all the time.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. You know, or laying on your chest.
But at any rate, it is getting a little bit late. If there's anybody who has like questions that you're really burning, wondering, wanting to know, I know one is what are your degrees in? Is one that was asked earlier on.
I have a bachelor's degree in human services with a minor in psychology from Purdue University. I have a master of science degree in marriage and family therapy from Northwestern University, and I have a PhD in human development with a specialization in marriage and family therapy from Virginia Tech.
Why didn't you continue with Purdue?
Because I missed my graduate school.
I
was playing Mass Effect 3 and was
Mass Effect 3. I've been playing Mass Effect, playing through Mass Effect 1, which I hadn't played. Mass Effect 2, which I played once and vaguely remember. And I'm in the middle of that right now. But man, is it just me, or are like all the non-story missions just like wastes of time? Like just everything that like
you've been spoiled. Going back to try to play that now is a little bit harder.
I guess, like, it's just, we were like, okay, let's try this one. And we go, and it's like, literally, it was drive down the path from point to point and pick up the thing, and good job, you're done, well done, here's some credits. And it's just like...
Mass Effect 2's side missions are pretty lame, yeah.
One was worse.
One's hard. One is brutal.
I actually stopped doing it. Like, one I just basically, like, honestly, I wouldn't say I didn't enjoy Mass Effect 1. I didn't enjoy Mass Effect 1 while I wasn't on the storyline mission. And so once I kind of realized, like, oh, it's all these side ones, I just went straight back into the story and just finished it. I was like, I do not need to go find another planet to drive around it for 10 minutes and check every corner for it to find a palladium in a corner, So anyway, but
the achievements are also designed to make you go through that game like fully, like at least like 3 times. It's brutal. If you want to get all of them, like you have to do 60% of the game or something like that with certain squad mates, and you can really only do that with 2 squad mates per run. It's it's awful. It's awful.
Yeah, I know that like it this is, I mean, we're like off topic a little bit, but it's just I know that there's a point in where critical decisions are made between you and your squad mates, and I don't like games that do that much. I want to always have the best outcome. I want to be able, and it's like, so when I've got like, choices you make throughout the game will affect whether people, and it's like, that is an anxiety to me. I want, like I play make-believe to have everything work out in the end. And I know that some people, they like the meaningful impact. It's like, I want to be told a story that I can interact with, but I end up in the right page and the happily ever after. And so like that's a part that I'm not looking forward to. And then on top of that, streaming it, because then it's like people are like, wow, you didn't do this to save Bill, or you didn't press the button in time fast enough for, or to cause X or Y, and you screw. And it's just like, oh, come on now. Like I'm doing the best that I can, and everyone's watching me screw up, and now I've got this squad mate who I liked get killed, so. Yes. But I can't play the game without flirting with my Yeoman Kelly or whatever, like at least a little bit, like go have that the same dialogue where she'll fall into my arms again just one more time. I just want to hear you. Now that's an enticing thought. You're goddamn right it is. Anyway, what do we have in chat?
Question for Dr. Mick. Any advice on clearing out old thought patterns that seem to be coming back up? That's harder than you might think. There's no simple answer to that one. You have to replace things with alternate things. A lot of people think that you just get rid of things. It's not true. Even if you change a trash can out, you fill it back with air. So in order to replace a certain sequence of thought, you have to define what the alternative sequence of thought would be and what that process might be. And so the question that one may ask themselves, and this really goes for anything that people want to change, is if you were to achieve that, what would be different? And then start implementing that in little micro steps. But it's that's not an easy one, because it depends on the thought patterns, depends on where they're coming from. Like if we're talking about thought processes that have emerged from, say, something like trauma, that can be a lot harder to reprocess and overwrite than, say, a random intrusive thought that you had last Tuesday. So it really depends.
After my depression, I've had a difficult time actually crying when I'm sad. Is there any explanation behind that?
Go for
the
it.
first thing that I would ask is, what qualifies as after your depression? Like, I mean, I would assume that's after a traumatic experience or an episode, but I mean, life does like depression continues on with you, whether you can treat it and handle it and have it, controlled. But there is no, all right, I'm good and done with that, and I no longer hit it anymore. With biology based depression, there are times when we are in an environment that puts us into that state, and it's not it's more acute and environmental. So if that might be the case, but if you're talking about like, I guess I'd want to clarify what was your depression before that you no longer feel like you're in now. But what do you have for that? Because I mean, I can't speak at all to the physiology or the expression, the inability to cry afterwards. Like that, I'm more curious, just more on the details. But I can't even give you an answer, regardless.
Well, I think the question that would, in general, come up for me would be, why is it that there's a compulsion's not the right word. Why is there an inclination that crying is something that should have to happen? There can be any number of reasons why crying isn't available as a way to process. I would have to do a full assessment to know what that is, but like, crying doesn't have to be present in order to engage with our emotional experience. A lot of people think, like, it's like with therapists. A lot of people think like, oh, I must not be doing the work if I don't cry when I'm in therapy, and that's just not true. I'm not ever trying to make people cry. Do people cry in therapy? Yes, absolutely. It is a reflection of emotion, but I do think one way to consider this is you have to look at humans from like an evolutionary perspective when we look at some of these things, and a lot of us refuse to do that, and it kind of drives me nuts. Crying is a physical outward signal to other humans that you are in need of some form of emotional assistance, that like you are distressed in some way or that you're overwhelmed in some way. And that invites people generally toward you and potentially pushes away people who are threatening. And so crying, if a person's brain couples crying with a certain anticipated response from others that the brain also considers to be dangerous or problematic, it will shut that off and be like, no way, we ain't doing that, because if we cry, then certain people may come around that I don't want coming around or whatnot. So like, I'm not saying that's exactly what's happening in this individual case, but like, I've seen that happen with folks. Like, you have to understand why humans do the things that they do, because we are social animals, and we have laughing, for example. Laughing is mostly understood as an indication that something could have been dangerous, but is realized to not be. And that when we experience that incongruousness, we laugh as a way to signal to other people it's actually okay. And it's fascinating, right? Because if we don't generally think about laughing as being super social, but it's more than just about laughing at the stimulus. It's about laughing as a social indicator that this is something that's safe when it may be perceived as not safe. And that's a whole other thing. But it's hard to know. But I would start by saying you don't necessarily have to expect to cry if you're sad. That you can be sad without crying.
All right. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't. Not to sound dismissive. All right. Well, I didn't. That's one that's past where I can't speak to. There's a couple I want to hit, just kind of a little rapid fire. But one is the started on beta blockers a few days ago, and I'm scared of taking them, which I don't know why, or accidentally taking them twice. Any helpers with this? I wrote in chat, first off, if you're concerned about taking them, just get a pill organizer. It seems silly, but it's like that way you just divide it up for the week, and that way you can look at it and say, yes, I know I took it. Just solve the problem. But in terms of being afraid of taking them, they're new to you. You're going to be anxious about it. Give it some time. It'll normalize, would be my initial thought. Like if after some amount, I don't know what the right amount of time would be, but after some amount of time, you still are anxious about it and scared, even though you've been on them for a while, and you have you would consider it at this point an irrational fear, then you're going to have to talk to someone and kind of work through what's going on there. And I don't think either of us could really answer like what's happening with you in that moment. You might be able to, Ryan.
Well, the one thing that I'll say, because medication is obviously it's a dicey one for me, but the thing that I will say is this. One, anytime you have a question about medication, whether it include, then that can include taking it and anxiety about taking it. You should always talk to the person who prescribed the medication to you to kind of discuss your concerns. The other thing that I will say is that so if you're prescribed medication and you haven't taken it yet, not taking the medication is better than starting and not committing to taking it the way that you were supposed to. And the reason I say that is because there are some times where people will start to take medication and then they either may forget or they kind of get skittish about it, or they have a side effect and they will initially think, I should stop taking this. There are some medications where it is immensely dangerous for you to do that. So if you are experiencing anxiety around any medication that has been prescribed to you, absolutely make sure that you talk to the person who has prescribed that to you so that you know what is safe for you to do if for whatever reason you experience something adverse, so that you can have a dialogue with them about that. But make sure that you are prepared and set up to commit to taking the medication as prescribed, not as some trying to take away your freedoms type of thing, but as a literally trying to keep you safe, because there are some psychotropic medications that literally can kill you if you do not follow them and if you quit them cold turkey. Benzos being the most common example of that.
Sure. And slightly more informed and thought out than my, just try it for a while. You'll get used to it. But, I mean, like there is some amount of, if something's new, you're going to be anxious about it. So take a look at it, evaluate it, and like Dr. Mick said, talk with your prescriber about it and kind of plot a course there. And it might just be, again, work through it, or it might be that another follow-up conversation will help you kind of find or either be more comfortable with it or find an alternative that you are more comfortable with. I've noticed that I've started randomly driving with no destination, just driving, and end up going to areas of past events listening to music. My interpretation would just be that you're going to past events or past areas because it's where and you're just trying to decompress or process whatever's going on in your mind, and it's a coping mechanism basically that you've built for yourself. I don't know, if to me, I wouldn't personally interpret that as something meaningful that you're going to these areas that other than it's just them, and that you don't have to feel the discomfort of being in a new area while processing whatever it is that's on your mind. But again, do you have anything that comes to mind for you?
The only thing that I would add as it relates to something like that is so many of us get caught up in wondering if the things we're doing are normal or okay. If doing that, or doing anything, I mean, to anybody in chat, if there's a thing that you do that causes significant distress or disruption of other areas of your life that are important, that's when it's time to consider whether that is something that needs to be talked about or worked through. If it's a thing that you do and it brings you a sense of calm, or if it's something you do that doesn't harm yourself, doesn't harm anybody, isn't impeding your functioning in any kind of way that is, dramatic or problematic for what you're trying to accomplish,
it's fine.
Who cares, right? Too many of us
safe, but otherwise, yeah.
Too many of us compare ourselves to an abstract idea of what normal should be or possibly is, and I'm not generally a fan of that. If it's okay to be reflective of it and to wonder why this is something that's important, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to change. Usually the indicator of something needing to change is the distress and disruption to daily functioning.
Right. How should one go about finding a therapist to start with, Jedi Clay? Dr. Mick does, at least he used to.
I have a video about it on my YouTube channel.
He's got a lot of resources and is definitely and helps a lot of people with that, because it is a daunting task, and especially trying to figure out, is this the right therapist for me, even from their resumes or their online profiles and stuff. So there's a lot of information on Dr. Mick's YouTube channel for that.
Yep.
And
I have two videos that people might find helpful. One is how to find a therapist, and the other one is what to expect in your first therapy session. Those two videos are really designed to help ease people's comfort levels with accessing therapy.
There's a couple different things with this. Is it normal for a person to say that you were just pretending that you were sick, or is it an indication the person is toxic? First off, again, Dr. Mick, is it normal is a very dangerous phrase.
Hate the word normal.
And you want to try and avoid that. But if what you're saying is someone is a person who I value, should they be supporting me, and or is their non-support a sign of toxicity? If they're not supporting you and they're not giving you what you need, and you're communicating that's what you need, then hey, a toxic is a thrown around word, but obviously they're not being beneficial to you in this, and it's either worth a conversation with them if there's someone who's important to say this, and to set your expectations and say, I need your help with this. I understand you might not understand it, but this is what I need from you. And if they're not willing to do that, then you need to basically start making decisions about how this person is going to be involved in your life and what level of importance you're going to assign them for yourself and your path, because they're clearly not helping you with something that you feel like you need help with. Someone who loves you should be trying to help you, even if they don't necessarily understand it. That doesn't mean that it's easy for them. It doesn't mean there might not be conflict or even initial rejection of it, but you should be able to work with them to if it's a meaningful relationship, should be able to work with them to a point where understanding is shared and found, even if it's a middle ground of some sort.
I'm going to use a real example from my experience on the crisis line to answer this question.
Okay.
So when I worked on the hotline, there were folks that would call regularly, and we called them consistent callers. And you would be able to recognize them by what they would say and what their voice sounded like and all these things. So there was a person who would call the hotline and I did overnight shifts, and so it very often happened overnight. And this person would call and say that there were spiders in his stomach and that he could feel them. Okay, so now many of us, as you hear me say this, most of us, the initial reaction to that is to say, okay, no, there aren't. Right? There's not spiders in your stomach. They're not actually. That's not possible. Even if there were spiders in your stomach, you wouldn't feel them. Whatever, right? We engage with it with a sense of rationality from, let's say, what's called a neurotypical standpoint. But for that guy, that was real. That experience is 100% real. That is what, and this is why when I said earlier, your experience of something is validation enough of the thing. And he, as far as he was concerned, there were spiders in his stomach. And so what we were trained to do in those moments, and I continue to use these skills to this day as a therapist, is that you respond to what that person is experiencing. So you validate the experience. I don't have to agree with it. I can have all the conceptual knowledge in the world to know that that person does not have spiders in his stomach. But I have to respond to him as if he does. Not to enable that, right? Like it's not enabling psychosis when I do that. What it's doing is it's calming him down. It's de-escalating him to hear somebody acknowledge, okay, I hear that you got spiders crawling around in your stomach. Tell me what that's like. Describe that to me. Are you scared? Are you okay with it? Where are you at with this? I tell this story because when people say things to folks like you're pretending or you're lying or you're blowing this out of proportion, that is merely their perception. Their perception does not necessarily mean that it's reality. In the same way that, like, we can hold people accountable and we can suggest alternative explanations for things without completely denying a person's experience. So even if that person is pretending, which there's probably a low chance of that, because most people don't pretend to be mentally ill, because it's not really sustainable, first of all, but second of all, like, it's just not fun. But if that person was pretending, then that person would need to decide what boundaries they want to set instead of just consistently telling that person that they're pretending. I tend to believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt, and as Zine said, if that relationship is meaningful in some way, to facilitate some dialogue about that, and if it's just not possible, then it's maybe time for you to set boundaries and say, you know what, I can't be having people around me that are going to say this. There are consequences to those boundaries, right? Like, if there are a lot of people who are saying, like, hey man, you seem to be not really communicating in a way that makes sense to me and I don't really want to be around it, like, that's their prerogative to set boundaries with you. But if you separate yourself from people who are maybe attempting to provide alternative explanations for what's going on, that's okay. It may pigeonhole you into your own description of what's going on. That may be okay. That also could be problematic. I would need a shitload more context in order to know whether that's the case. But I think our knee-jerk into things like, is this toxic or is this not? Toxicity is an amalgam of behaviors. It's not a one-off type thing. But generally when people say things like, you're pretending, when you're trying to say a real emotional experience, you're having a real experience, it's not going to be a great response. It's not one that I would advocate for people going to immediately.
Claire asks, basically, is there any generic advice to help someone navigate depression when it stems from a very real and raw connection to tragic realities of life? My response, Claire, for me would be the generic advice is you need to work with a therapist if it's a strong and vivid reality that you are having a hard time processing. That's what therapists do, and how you can get help with that. It's not something that you can just pound your head through if it's something that's been with you for this long and that you still feel unresolved on. So get help from someone. That's my just straight up advice, especially if it's something as powerful as you're describing.
I would also add that, the real and raw connection to tragic realities of life, there are different ways to frame that. There are some that might say that that's actually an ideal, right? To have a more closer ear to the ground conceptualization of how life works. And there's some people that would say, no, that's crushing and I don't want to deal with that at all. What it really comes down to is like those realities exist whether we want them to or not, right? Some of us have experiences that bring us closer to them. Some of us are able to live in more ignorance of them. And I don't mean that in the malicious way. I just mean that in like you haven't experienced it, so you don't know what it's like. But those realities are true regardless. Sometimes what grabs us is our response to that is we devote an immense amount of energy into that direction of like really like thinking about that and dare I say dwelling on that instead of focusing on what can I control amidst these realities of life? Like what is within my purview to be able to exert influence on, and where am I going to do that? Now, there's relativity to that. I understand that like in some ways the idea that you could influence whatever you want is a ridiculously privileged position to be in, and that not everybody has the luxury to be able to do that. And at the same time, it doesn't change that like all of us have relative spheres of influence in our lives, and that finding our way to control those things that we can control amidst those realities that we've been exposed to is a really good start. Because a lot of times with like those types of perceptions and with depression and stuff, it really gets easy to see the world is out of our control. And really, in general, the world is out of our control. There is infinitely more things that are out of our control than are in our control. And if we don't spend any time looking at the things that we can control, then we also lose control of ourselves, or we perceive ourselves as losing control of ourselves, which is not particularly great. So the world itself is generally uncontrollable. Your sphere of influence, you have some ability to exert on, and you can only control the way in which you do that. Focus in on that and then respond accordingly to the things that come your way.
My company put me through the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People training, and that's I couldn't tell you most of the habits, but there is one that always stood with me and stuck with me at the same time as stuck with me. And that is defining your circle of influence and your circle of concern, and working as actively as you can to make those match. Your circle of concern is everything you worry about, and your circle of influence are things you have control over. And basically, the teaching of it is just, and as a generalized rule, worrying about something you have no control over is not a productive habit. It's not, you can't change it. It's just fear. And, that doesn't get into, the literal mental health side. This isn't talking, that's not intended to be a lesson of, what you should and shouldn't be paying attention to. But as far as productivity and kind of that sort of thing, focusing on these are the factors and variables and situations that I can control, the things that I can affect, and focusing on those and guiding your life with your attention put onto what you can change and what you can control, instead of being out of control in your life, being pulled and just going with what forces you can't control dictate to you. And sometimes that's a very small thing. I can't control what my boss does to me, but I can make sure I'm going to take my 15-minute break every time because I'm entitled, and like whatever it is that that within yourself gives you that sense of control. You focus on that, and you kind of bring in as much as possible, and just really try and build off of what you can do. And again, that isn't getting into. I understand that there's going to be times where you're anxious about things that you can't, and I'm not trying to address those specific moments, but as far as your habits and really just things to kind of think about, the time that you spend dwelling on that which you cannot control is generally lost time. You don't really come out of those moments having any more ability at the end of the thought or the end of the time spent dwelling on it as in any better position than you went into it. You've just spent time being anxious. And again, I understand anxiety. Like, I'm not talking about when we're dealing with a actual therapeutic or clinical anxiety, runaway, panic attack and stuff like that. I'm talking about simple habits of ways to approach situations.
No, but you can perpetuate anxiety through how you respond to it. I mean, there is, like, if you feel a lack of control in your environment, and then you exclusively focus on building that awareness of the lack of control in the environment, you are very likely to exacerbate the anxiety that you're experiencing, because anxiety is all about creating a physiological response to uncertainty so that you can mitigate that risk. So there is a very real thing to consider there with, like, your responses to those moments can perpetuate or mitigate. I think I've done the circuit metaphor before, but it's like, the voltage comes in, you control the circuit, and you control whether you amplify that or whether you mitigate it or whether you divert it elsewhere through the circuit that you create. And a lot of people focus on the input instead of focusing on the circuit itself. So focus on the circuit, friends.
Unbiased Mist is, I believe I saw that you mentioned you had recently lost your job, and there's a snowstorm out, but you're inclined to go out and go for a drive to kind of try and handle and cope and think, even though it's dangerous. There's a there's a little bit of caution there in the are you wanting to go out to hopefully find and seek out harm? My guess would be with you're kind of in a fuck it mood, and you just want to go do what you want to do, and you don't like, if something happens, I don't care, like, kind of more that angry, hurt, flippant, kind of disconnected, disassociated. And obviously going out and driving in a snowstorm is not a good idea, and you should try and contain that, whether that's reaching a point and a compulsion within you to where you need to treat it with more criticality than that. That's an assessment you have to make. But my initial guess would be that you're in a bad mood and you just kind of want to go do it and just say fuck it and like, kind of, and have that slight thought of maybe I'll get hit, that intrusive thought of maybe something will happen, and I don't care if it does, kind of throwaway. And again, you can get into a real dangerous area there, but it's not necessarily atypical for you to be in that kind of mood. So you've got to kind of self-evaluate and decide. It's not something that either Dr. Mick or I are going to be able to tell you this is where you are at in the level of crisis, and like, that's kind of beyond where we could assess. But obviously don't make poor decisions that are going to send you out into the middle of a snowstorm and put you in danger. If you're feeling a compulsion to where you can't control it, then you probably need to take steps to somehow alleviate that, whether it's surround yourself with people or contact, whatever the level of necessity is, you have to decide that. Does that make, you think that's about right?
You nailed that one. I've got a question from my end, if you don't mind me asking it.
Go for it.
It's a very simple one, which is, what is learned helplessness? And this is a topic that comes up, I think, a lot, which learned helplessness is a systemic process that we individually engage with, but also is cultivated by the folks around us. So in a nutshell, basically, people, if they believe that they're not capable of doing certain things, will often create a narrative that they are incapable and that they are not competent enough to do things. And then what they will do is often surround themselves with people who can facilitate that incompetence, either by doing things for them on their behalf, by reinforcing the narrative that they're unable. They may even surround themselves by people who are more capable as a way to continue to perpetuate that sense that they are helpless. And what it does is it often invites relationship, but in a way that is not fulfilling, because it's people doing things for you instead of connecting with you in them. And it's important for us to realize that our narratives about ourselves can absolutely create a bias towards what we surround ourselves with, because we want that narrative to be perpetuated. And also, it's worth looking at how are you inviting relationships and connection into your life? Have you learned that the way people will come towards you and engage with you is when you act or show that you are unable to do a thing? If I show that, for example, I can't open a Word document on my computer, and I've learned that, like, if I express that I don't know what I'm doing, 3 people will come over to my desk and help me learn how to open up a Word document. And that's the only way I've really learned to get engagement from my coworkers, because I'm nervous to engage in other ways. You learn that that works. Next time I want to have engagement from my coworkers, maybe I'll find something that I don't know how to do. And what's scary about that is that over time, it actually can create helplessness, because you are now actually relinquishing control that you have, and you are relinquishing your ability to learn certain skills in the spirit of connection and relationships. It's not really the way that you want people to connect with you. So I'm trying not to go the victim blamey route on that, because there are things where we legitimately don't know how to do them. And there are times where caregivers will overdo it on behalf of the people around them, because they build an entire sense of self around being able to help others, which actually can create helplessness in other people. So this is why I talk about it being a systemic thing. But I think it's important to understand that, like, you can connect with people beyond receiving assistance from them, and that you actually have things that you can offer, and you can help others, and also you can engage at an equal playing field sometimes, rather than a teacher-learner space. So it's just a perpetuated reinforcement system that facilitates relationships, and that's why people will often do it.
This is one that I feel like I could go off on a little bit. Toxic work culture opinions, what brings bad culture, how to fix.
Have at it, buddy.
Toxicity is a cancer, and if you allow it in any sort of form, then it will spread and it will grow, and you will facilitate more toxicity with people who are attracted to toxicity and create toxicity, and you will push away people who are intolerant of it. So whether it's in a work culture or even in our streams, it is a top-down basically situation. And if you are a worker in a toxic company, you are not going to affect change as a worker in that company, through whatever means you start, because toxicity has to be dealt with. It has to be handled, and it can't be allowed. And I have had very dramatic separations with people in stream, very dramatic separations with people in at work, of recognizing and realizing that this person is creating the environment that is starting to breed that. If you allow it, then it will spread. And so toxicity has to be handled really from the top down, from the leadership and the company culture projected down and enforced. And it is a very important thing, because again, a work is very, it's a little bit less fluid, but at the same time, ultimately over time, it ends up being the same way as a stream. If I allow Johnny Dickhead to be in here, and he's just kind of an ass to people, but Johnny Dickhead donates a lot or whatever, and for some reason he's a friend in real life, and I just allow Johnny Dickhead to be Johnny Dickhead, people are going who are non-toxic and who are prefer that non-toxic environment are going to leave, and they're not going to be willing to engage, because I'd go there, but Johnny Dickhead's always there hanging out, being a dickhead. In the meantime, Johnny Dickhead is going to make good friends with Billy the Ass and Tommy the Jerk, and so
man,
now
you know some shitty people, man.
I do, man. And they're going to start hanging out, and now you've got a group of people, and this group of people is going to continue to push more and more people away. a work site is going to be less fluid than that because people are bound by jobs and obligations and stuff like that. But ultimately, at some point, it's going to really establish that either you are in an environment where that is not brokered and is not allowed, that doesn't mean that no problems happen. Like drama and issues are going to arise. It's just people interacting with people. But genuine toxicity tolerance is based around poor leadership and a willingness to put up with it, and lack of foresight into just how invasive and corrosive it can be. So as a worker, you're not going to fix a toxic work environment. And if you are in an environment where you are not happy and constantly in stress or in crisis because of it, then as scary as change is, because we don't like to change, the reality is you're probably going to have to look for some alternative, because that is not going to change. So toxicity and me, we aren't friends. I don't get along with it. I don't deal with it, or I don't broker it. And one of the more interesting things about it that is quite frequently the expression of the problem, the person who is acting out, the person who is the issue, is not the source. The real toxicity I have found comes from the people who are behind the scenes stirring the shit and jazzing up the one emotional guy. I mean, like, you know how this isn't fair, how they did that, and just like the whisper campaign. And that's the one that you have to track down and fight and get rid of, or you can punish the guy who acted out all you want. Another person's just going to take their place because the real source is hiding behind them. That's a difficult lesson to learn, and I've had real interesting real world encounters as well as in stream where that has been the case.
Toxicity is perpetuated by diffuse boundaries. If I had to pick two non...
Sorry, I just read. To be fair, the name Billy Dickhead should have been a red flag.
That's true. It's a good point. Yeah, Johnny.
You're right.
You're right.
Anyway, sorry. Go on.
I mean, they literally told you what to expect.
I apologize.
There you go, giving people the benefit of the doubt, Zine.
I wasn't prepared, but yeah.
So, when I say diffuse boundaries, I essentially mean like no boundaries to very like loosey-goosey, unmaintained boundaries. But, if you take like you're in my community, for example, I'm going to use as an example of this because to an extent, you and I both facilitate work environments by streaming. Like, I know for you, this is your full-time work environment. For me, it's a part-time work environment. The reason you and I have communities that people continue to come back to and say, I really love this space and I feel comfortable here, is because you and I have a very well-implemented system of boundaries. There is very low tolerance for people acting out because nobody is entitled to be in these spaces. In the same way, like if you take it to a work environment, like I don't believe people are entitled to the space that they work. I think people are always active participants in the environments that they are in. So in some ways, you have to have, as Zine is talking about, which is a very important point, it is top down. It is not bottom up. You cannot have people in positions of power in a given system enabling and allowing toxicity. That breaks the entire thing down. If you don't have a system of boundaries that are implemented by people in power, you're screwed. And if people in power are toxic, you're totally screwed. So, like, you're totally screwed. So, what it comes down to some extent, is I look at toxicity similarly to how I may look at something like racism. I'm fine with people who are racist or toxic being uncomfortable. I am okay with boundaries saying you can't be here if you're going to act like this. We will not allow this to happen. And what oftentimes you will see with people who are problematic and stir shit up is when you go to set boundaries with them, they will vibrate intensely in a way that tries to get you to stop exerting a boundary. People often act out in the presence of boundaries in an attempt to get people to back off of setting them. And if you have people in positions of power who are skittish about making people uncomfortable, they will often back down. So as hard as it can be, and I know you and I have our fair share of times that this has happened in the stream sphere, just for example, as hard as it can be, I have banned people who have been active participants in the community before because something turned south. We tried to work it out and it didn't work. And I am unapologetic about that. I have a set of standards and expectations for what it means to be able to participate in my stream space as you do. And they are very clear. And they, you know, I'm willing to work with you a little bit, but if you insist on breaking it, you're out. So really what that comes down to, it can sort of feel like demoralizing if you, I'm sure if you're in a toxic work environment, which I have been as well, if you're listening to us talk about this, it can kind of feel helpless. And in some ways it is if you have poor leadership. And that's why I think it's really important. And I realize this is harder for some than it is for others. God damn, she's so cute. It's important to try to find employment as best you can with people who seem to mean business in positions of power, and people who have high standards for the people that work with them. You should try to surround, and in life, you should surround yourself by people who hold themselves to the same standard that you would hold them to, and that you would hold yourself to. But it's very, very difficult to navigate toxic work environments. There are HR works for the company, not for you. You can go to HR, but that, you know, you use the systems you can, but ultimately, again, the only force that you can control is you and how you navigate that system. And again, I realize it's a position of privilege to be able to say that because there are some folks who really are stuck. And in that point, then you engage in as much self-care as you possibly can when you are outside of the work environment. And you do your best to create boundaries internally so that you don't bring it home, because that's really where toxic work environments go bad, is when people carry that stuff into outside environments. Limit how often you talk to people that you live with about it. Limit your amount of energy that you devote towards thinking about all the toxicity when you're on the beach. You know, like, I mean, imagine if, you know, if you and I, when you were out here in July, if we spent our entire time bitching about stuff, like, it would take down the vibe, right? Like, it's okay to commiserate a little bit, but like, that ultimately starts to really just permeate through. And now all of a sudden my self-care and my friendships are affected by this. So you have to have some self-discipline around the way that you internalize and move around outside of the workspace with this as well, because it can be really demoralizing.
Yeah, for sure. Any last thoughts from anybody that you feel like you've been missed, that you just really need an answer, or what's going on? I think that it's getting pretty late for both of us, and probably about time to wrap up. I don't know. I haven't seen wall face from you yet, but I'd rather not, you know.
I'm usually good for at least another hour and a half or so.
Oh,
So
wow, look at you going now.
You know, I came fully prepared, although I started a half hour earlier. But I'll say, while we wait for folks to maybe say that, first I want to just say, for everybody who's here, whether you're on my side over on YouTube or if you're over here on Twitch with Zine, I appreciate that all of you come out for these, and you are willing to listen to just two dudes talk for a little while about stuff. I mean, obviously, dude, I enjoy speaking with you all the time when we do this. I love doing these.
Sure.
And I really appreciate everybody who's here. I know we haven't been able to answer every question that's come through the pipeline. We do our best, but I really appreciate every single person who is here, whether you're on YouTube or Twitch right now watching us, for supporting what we do, for supporting each other, for cultivating these two communities. Because Zine and I, you know, we do what we can, but you all also participate in the way that we would expect, and that's really great, and it's why people keep coming back. And just big appreciation all around for everybody who's part of these things.
Yeah, I've mentioned it before, but it's like, coming into these, I'm always slightly nervous, because it's like, you know, are we just going to repeat the same things over and over? Is it people are just like, oh my God, is it, you know, I mean, and I really, for you, like, that does stand out to me. Like, there's got to be a whole list of questions that are you still excited about answering them, even though you've seen them a million times? Or is it just like, okay, for the love of God, stop trying to be normal. It means nothing. Like, are you at that, like,
No.
I'm about to explode?
So I'm going to give people a little bit of a window of insight into partly how my brain works in this space, but also like some of the backdrop for why I do not mind getting repeat questions every single night. So my dissertation was literally about how do you facilitate meaningful educational experiences for people? And one of the theories, so to speak, or philosophies that underlied that dissertation and was the foundational principle for it, that was confirmed through the research that I did, is that when you engage with people, as an instructor, you have the ability to engage with people either as objects or as people. And a lot of poor educators will engage with folks as objects. And when you start to do that, you start to project your own frustrations and incompetencies and stuff onto them, because you're seeing them as the role that they're in as opposed to the complexity that they bring to that role. And so educators who consistently remind themselves that they are interfacing with people, and that they are interfacing, in my case, for example, I'm interfacing the majority with folks who do not have 9 years of education and 3 very expensive pieces of paper on their wall, with this information, that the majority of the people that I'm interfacing with just don't know this information. And so my role is to help, even if it's one new person a stream, be brought up to speed in whatever way they need to be. And one of the ways that we do that is through non-judgmental repetition. And when people are in a learning space, if they feel judged for the fact that they are not having that they don't have all the information and knowledge that the instructor or advanced people have, it will shut them down, because learning is already an inherently anxiety-provoking experience. It has to be.
It's vulnerable.
It's very vulnerable. You can't learn without anxiety. And so it's important to receive people in that way that is acknowledging of that understands that it's an anxiety-inducing thing to like pop into chat and tag one of us and ask us a question like that. It's not easy to do for a lot of people. So like for me, I look at every single question as a encounter with a person where it is an opportunity for me to engage in some non-judgmental repetition, because that person hasn't been part of my stream maybe even for 3.5 years. Maybe they just got here, or maybe they missed it when I answered it last time. If I get frustrated with people for things that are completely beyond their control, all I've done is turn somebody away from the space. And I think that's something that you also are mindful of, whether it's as explicitly as I'm talking about. Like, you do these things, and I think that's why people feel comfortable returning and asking these questions. But no, I am never annoyed by these. This is why I do it. If I didn't want to answer these questions, I wouldn't stream. I would not show up at night if I didn't want to do this. I believe in being fully invested in the environment that I'm in at the time that I'm in it. And so if I wasn't ready to answer questions or talk about these things and be as warm as I can possibly be, I slip up every once in a while, but be as warm as I can possibly be, then I shouldn't be here in the first place, because that's not what people expect when they show up to our streams.
So a little shared moment of vulnerability, just talking about that. Literally today, I during my stream, I brought in a portion that's kind of new to me, that where I was it was doing some VR stuff, and it's a game that I'm not as good with, which is always, just as attempting to entertain when like my not being great in a performance game is overwhelming. But then it's, when anytime you have VR, then there's tech issues.
Yeah.
And so I had people that were like commenting on my camera angle and commenting, suggesting when I was having some audio problems, try that. And I just I was not in the mental space for it. And I actually I didn't really talk about it with the viewers at the moment, but I ended up being like, okay, we're done, because I was like, I am getting annoyed at the people that I am trying to entertain, and that's never gonna work. So I had to like close it down, and then kind of step and let's do something else, and go into massive, and I even turned off face cam, just kind of calmed down and got back to where I was centered again. But it can definitely, you can get off in those moments and have that wrong approach, and you've got to be able to kind of recognize and say, I'm not being as effective as I need to be, and whether that's as an educator or as an entertainer or all of those things. One of the things that it was either mentioned in chat or something we said very, very early on, but that really rung with me, was just about trying to kind of show up when you're dealing with depression. And I'll tell you that is literally the hardest part of my job, is when I am having, and like I said, I've found that I'm starting to get a little, I don't know whether it's just tolerant of my medication or, whatever, for whatever reason, I'm having more breakthrough days, but as much as everyone encourages you, like, hey, take a mental health day, you do great. Like, the audience is great, except I don't get paid. I don't have days off. I don't, and the reality is if I don't show up, then people do leave, and I have to worry about numbers every day of my life and all those things. So in general, while I can take a day off every now and then, I've got to show up to work. It's my job. And man, the streaming and being lively and entertaining and as a as a person that people want to watch when I'm feeling like shit, that is the hardest thing. And I'm not great at it. Like, it just straight up, like, without wanting to give too many secrets away, sometimes I do have chronic headaches, but sometimes my headache is just more like I want to punch a wall. And it's like, guys, I've got a little bit of a headache. I'm just gonna be a little more subdued. I'm just doing my thing. Thank you for being here. We're gonna have a chill day. And it's like, it might be that my head hurts, which is often the case, or it might be that just I cannot engage and I'm sorry. But man, getting tossed around by that and not compartmentalizing emotion is not something I do well. Like, my emotions are right here, baby. Yeah. Like, I am not you never know. I'm not an enigma. You know how I feel most of the time. I can be polite to people I don't like. Like, it's like I can be perfectly polite. In fact, if I'm being polite to you and not teasing to you, you should probably be a little concerned. But in general, like, that, just something about earlier today just made me like, today I had specific examples of that, and then also just of, in general, this job. I love it. It's great. I get to make so many friends. But oh man, having those days where when I was at the corporate office, I could just go put on my headphones and just sit there and write a program, and I shut the world out. That was a hell of a lot easier than being like, "Hey guys, what's going on?"
I know,
today?
right?
Oh shit! But
it's a headspace. It's a different headspace.
It really is. One of the things that I like, I know there's always a lot of people that are kind of considering streaming or starting it out, and one of the things that we've actually talked about, or I've talked about pitching a panel for TwitchCon about this, that streamers don't consider, and it's both on the streamer side but also their mods, is the types of people, situations, and mental crises or things that happen that you as a streamer need to be able to handle or deflect or something that you are going to encounter, that you just don't when you're thinking about, hey, I want to play games and have people show up and great, maybe they throw some pennies my way, that's awesome. We're in the middle of COVID. How are you going to handle it when one of your favorite viewers dies? How are your mods going to handle it when someone comes in and says they're considering hurting themselves? How are you going to handle it when, this person that you depend on for some of the biggest donations turns out to be toxic, and or we've even had what turns out to be grooming members of the community, and being a sexual predator? Like, there are so many things that you have to take on board, and it's like, I don't want to necessarily scare all those would-be streamers, but you do need to be prepared to start at least the thought of, how am I going to handle this from a basic framework? How am I going to start to handle this? Is it just, like anyone that comes in? I'm not a doctor. If you need a doctor, talk to a doctor. That's perfectly valid, and that's actually probably one of the better ways to do it. But unfortunately, people are so invested in their friends and the audience that they engage and and start trying to, like, well, our DMs are open. Happy to talk to their problems, and it's great. Like, my mods all lend an open ear to anyone who's, if you need to DM one of us, we'll listen. I mean, my DMs are open. Like, you can be like, hey, what, I have this thing, what do you think? And I'll do my best to answer. Sometimes the answer is, I ain't got nothing, like, go talk to a doctor or go see a therapist. But but at least, if it's just I need to vent for a little while, we're all happy to listen. But handling, training the mods and teaching them that none of us are God. We can't save someone who's going to hurt themselves. We can't control their actions. We can't be responsible for their actions. As callous as that seems, I'm sure that's something that you, in the education and training for as a therapist, have to go through or deal with a lot, I think, is learning to separate that people are going to take, we're going to be dealing with at-risk people, and especially where we are creating a mental health advocacy space, and not all of those interactions are going to end in a good way, and that is not our fault. It is not the that is on the person and the actions that they took with that, for themselves. But how do you still bring compassion, all that? I don't know that I really have a full, let me put a button point on this, other than just as a word of kind of consideration for all those who are seeking to build their stream or considering getting into it. You are going to have to one day face these if you continue down this path, and you will do a lot better to begin the framework of understanding what you're going to do and how you're going to handle it, and have that conversation before it's in front of you with your mods and with everyone. Take the steps to be ready to deal with that, because human interaction is what it is, and life is fragile. Things happen, and one day they're here, the next day they're gone. What are you going to do, and how do you handle it? So
yep.
Because I'm Debbie Downer today, but just
no, it's true though. I mean, this is a people business, man. Like, this isn't. There's a difference between playing video games and playing video games while people, whether it's 3 people or 300 or 3,000 people, are watching you and engaging with you while you do this. Like, this is not. There are some streamers that get away with basically, they never interact with stream, and they don't make it an encounter with people that are in their chat. But if you're going to be in a space where you're interfacing with people and you're trying to cultivate a community, yeah, you're cultivating human relationships, and they are inherently complex. Everybody comes at everything with their massive complexity of learned experience, and you have to figure out how to navigate that and put that together. And what it really comes back down to is you got to know what your boundaries are. You have to know why you're doing what you're doing, what your expectations are. I mean, I spent more time figuring out what the rules of my space were than I did figuring out actually how to do a stream when I first started, and that was partially my learning from being a therapist. But yes, you have to know what your limitations and what your expectations and boundaries are, or else you're screwed.
We take a very nuanced and very well thought out and extensive approach to rules and boundaries in our stream, and I really tried to distill it down in a way that I feel like most people can understand. You know what my stream rules are, don't you?
Yeah, not off the top of my head, but I know they're very short. They're it's don't be a dick.
Don't be a dick.
And
be bad.
Yeah, don't fight with my mods.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just being a dick, right? Literally.
Yeah, it's don't be a dick.
Our approach was this is an adult space. Act like an adult. If you don't know how to act like an adult, then you don't belong. And I found for me, I mean, obviously, where you're bringing in a different level of
I have to have disclaimers.
But I am not your you can sue me all you want. I'm just a dude on the internet, so good luck. Yeah. Please don't, but yeah, it was just that, how do we kind of, I've seen a million different no shirts, no shoes, no service rules list on streams, and it just seems like, I'm just going to expect you to know how to behave around other people, and if you can't do that, then I expect you to not be a problem, at least. And if you can't do that, then I'm going to expect you to find somewhere else that is more intended for, being a problem.
Yep.
So,
the community is more important than any one individual.
Yes.
No matter what role they have.
Anything last on your mind or that you've seen go by?
No. I mean, we covered a lot of ground tonight. It's funny how there are common themes to these talks, but we manage to have new stuff come up every time, and I like that. I mean, it's part of the versatility of chat, and they bring stuff to us. But I have enjoyed this immensely. I don't have anything that I see on my side currently that I think fits within our current flow. So I will say this, that if you are a fellow streamer out there, I am willing to be an assistant in whatever way I can to helping deal with mental health concerns as it relates to your community. If you want to learn a little bit more how to stay in your lane with whatever your relative role is. If you have people that are very obviously struggling with their mental health in your community, you can send them over to me, and I can help get them pointed in the right direction. One of the things I don't advertise as much as I probably should is that I try to be a resource for fellow streamers as well as it relates to this stuff to help you learn how to navigate these things, because it is an important thing to figure out. So
one of the ways that Dr. Mick and I mean, we obviously established our friendship in a couple different ways, but one of the things that's been very, very helpful for me and that really kind of, I think, put some roots into the budding friendship is it was actually just a Discord conversation with him and Lobro and myself, and we would just discuss, kind of, and primarily him acting as a resource, although it was collaborative and with all of us, we would discuss issues that happen in the community and how can we handle this? This person's a problem, or and sometimes it was high level, sometimes it was very specific. And again, obviously, this isn't about giving therapy or anything like that, but there are community issues that came up, and Dr. Mick was right there to be. He checks his messages once every couple months, so you have to wait a little bit. But
it's true. It is true. I am terrible at responding to DMs. I'm notorious for that. Yep.
He does not hold back once he starts. Like he's like, he's earned those papers on the wall by writing many long dissertations, and so that's what you can expect getting back. And you're like, okay, well,
he's here.
He showed up. Once he showed up, he was definitely here.
Told you, I am fully invested in what I'm doing at the time that I'm there. Yes.
But I've always been very appreciative of that, and it's helped both just in setting my own boundaries and understanding, but also being able, sometimes being able to go back and say, look, I have the weight of, I have discussed this with other educated people more than myself who bought very expensive papers that they don't actually pay for. They just pay the minimum payment on for 40 years or something, and then it goes away.
20, and then you pay a tax on it as income tax, so it's fun.
But at any rate, and they agree that in my analysis that you're an idiot, and that's been very helpful at times.
Great. Good.
But no, like genuinely, you've always been willing to act as a resource for anyone, and who comes at you with genuine concerns from the community and such. And I've always respected. At times, I've been surprised, but I've respected your willingness, even with your close friends and stuff, to set boundaries and say, no, this is a you thing. This doesn't involve me. Leave me the hell out of it. And he is not afraid to say that as well. And I have
that is true.
I have had him say that as well. And you know what? It's perfectly reasonable. And it's a demonstration that clear boundaries and being aware of your boundaries can work even when it might feel uncomfortable to say no. You can make that work. And so he's even acted as a living example of that, as he's told me to pound sand on something. But at any rate, I love you, dude. It's pound sand.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me, because it's like you get nowhere. It just absorbs it and nothing happens. You haven't moved anything, nothing. And that's the whole point. Is you're just you're not achieving a damn.
Pictured
thing.
somebody on the beach just.
Yeah. And what are they achieving? Literally, if the expression when you carry it out at least makes sense.
It's true.
Go
look like
sand.
an idiot. Yeah.
Yeah. Go have fun doing literally nothing. But I love you, dude. I appreciate you.
Man.
Visiting you was a great experience, and I had
it was a lot of fun.
Such a great week, and I did kind of come to the realization that I don't mind cigars, but for me it's a social thing. Like you and Pionk and a couple of the others were like, ooh, I like the flavor of this, and I'm like, it all tastes like smoke to me, but I'm here vibing with you guys and feeling good, so I am happy. Like just throw me that one that's not gonna make me puke, and I'm good, sort of thing.
Kind of how my wife is. Yeah, you and my wife are very similar. And I know, me and Pionk are like connoisseurs.
She's like, oh, this one's got a little bit more of a walnut flavor, and I'm like, it tastes like smoke.
Yeah, it's just they're all the same.
And if there's one thing that Vegas opened up my eyes to, it's that in every city, in every cigar bar or cigar place across the land, there is a dwarf like person with a long beard and long hair who is sitting on a stool inside that humidor, who is going to want nothing more than to talk all day long with you about cigars, and it doesn't matter where you go, that same person is in every single cigar bar. He's always there. He's always ready to give you some fuel for your torch. And he's always ready to give you some recommendations, and he loves his job. And I aspire to be as content as that guy sitting on that stool, waiting to talk to someone about cigars. Man, he is living his best life.
Especially the guys in Vegas, because you get new people every time.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like you just have the same regulars coming in. It's like it's a new person every time, and you're like, yeah, let's go. Mostly people who probably act like they know what they're doing and really don't. But that's got to be fun for them to figure out.
And then it was kind of funny to be like, these are really good. I mean, I say I can't taste it, but I mean, obviously there's some that I kind of enjoy a little bit more than others, but we were like, oh, these are really good. And then we look up and we realize, like, we're at the bar that's owned by the place that's making the cigars, that we're like, these are really good. Where do you get these from? Here.
Yeah, literally here.
That's us. See the name? Like, holy shit. Okay, all right. I mean, I'm pretty sure they don't wrap them there, but still, it was like, what, David Christoph's or whatever? And
David off in Geneva.
Davidoff, yeah, and they were really good. So, at any rate, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you everybody for hanging out with us. And again, if you have not made the jump over to Red Side, I almost said RedTube, but that's
it. I'm not streaming there yet.
Give us a couple years.
Not there yet. Yeah.
Over to the Red Side on YouTube. Be sure you're subscribed to DrMick. You're catching him. He's still around. He is still putting out his great content. His OnlyFans is coming soon. And you're not going to want to miss him. He's a great friend, and thank you so much for coming on and doing what you do for myself and then also for the community.
I appreciate you, buddy, and people on my side. As you know, go follow Zine on. He makes the pilgrimage over to YouTube every once in a while, in the same way I kind of do with Twitch every once in a while. But
Saturdays are YouTube days.
I love that we could meet here in the middle and be on both. It's really lovely.
I'm pretty sure I'm not technically in violation of because I'm not streaming to YouTube. If it's getting recast, I can't control that.
Yeah, it's being cast on my channel. This isn't. And it looks different, and you don't even have the same background on mine that you have on yours. So,
well, that's because you're actually seeing half of my filtered, because I have the chroma key LUT on there as well. So it's basically you're seeing my chroma key applied, but without the background, which is coming from the scene. I can do a thing, or like I could share. If I went into face cam mode, then I could share my entire screen and effect with you, but then that's what people on my side would see. And so it's like I had to kind of choose where to go and then how to get there. So,
you're crafty. I like that.
I just, I had to make my choices, and I made them, and I have no regrets. Well, a few, but, living in regret does not change my future. So
that's right. We even talked about that today.
I get no wisdom.
You should watch the VOD.
Watch the VOD if you haven't. Guys, thank you for coming out. Thank you, dude.
Yes, appreciate you all.
All right.
It was good having you here, buddy.
Yep. All right, we're going to bounce, and we'll see each other and talk soon, my friend.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Later, bud.